Okay, I would like to call the meeting to order and welcome everyone in attendance to please take their seats. The committee has under consideration the estimates of the Ministry of Education for the fiscal year ending March 31st, 2023. I'd ask that we go around the table and have the members introduce themselves for the record. Minister, please introduce the officials who are joining you at the table.
Thank you, Chair. And I have with me Andre Tremblay, Deputy Minister, Christine Sewell, Assistant Deputy Minister, Financial Services, Emily Ma, Acting Executive Director of K-12 Fiscal Oversight. In the gallery, I have Dan Karras, Acting Assistant Deputy Minister, System Excellence, Jeff Willen, Assistant Deputy Minister, Strategic Services and Governance, Jennifer Flaman, Assistant Deputy Minister of Curriculum, Nicole Callahoo, Assistant Deputy Minister, First Nations, Métis and Inuit Education, and Kindy Joseph, Assistant Deputy Minister, Program and System Support, and several other of my team members, including my Chief of Staff, Nicole Williams.
My name is Jackie Lovely and I'm the MLA for Camrose and the chair of this committee. We will begin starting to my right with introductions.
Grant Hunter, Tabor Warner.
Jeremy Nixon, Calgary Klein.
Tanny Al, Fort McMurray, Wood Buffalo.
Good morning. Mark Smith, Drayton Valley, Devon.
Good morning, Mickey Amory, Calgary Cross.
Janice Irwin, Edmonton Highlands, Norwood.
Sarah Hoffman, Edmonton Glenora.
Drew Barnes, Cypress Medicine Hat.
Now we'll go to the members participating remotely. Please proceed, member.
Richard Gottfried, MLA, Calgary Fish Creek.
I'd like to note the following substitutions for the record. Mr. Nixon is substituting for Mrs. Fry, and Mr. Stephan will be substituting for Mr. Gottfried for a portion of the meeting from 10:45 to noon. And Member Irwin is substituting for Deputy Chair Ms. Sigurdsson. Finally, Mr. Yao is substituting for Mr. Reid. A few housekeeping items to address before we turn to the business at hand. Please note that the microphones are operated by Hansard. Committee proceedings are being live streamed on the internet and broadcast on Alberta Assembly TV. The audio and visual stream and transcripts of the meetings can be accessed via the Legislative Assembly website. Members participating remotely are encouraged to have your camera on while speaking and your microphone muted when you are not speaking. Remote participants who wish to be placed on a speaker's list are asked to email or send a message in the group chat to the committee clerk, and members in the room are asked to please signal to the chair. Please set your cell phones and other devices to silent for the duration of the meeting. Honourable members, the standing orders set out in the process for consideration of main estimates. A total of 6 hours has been scheduled for consideration of the estimates for the Ministry of Education. Standing Order 59.016 establishes the speaking rotation and speaking times. In brief, the Minister or a member of the Executive Council acting on the Minister's behalf will have 10 minutes to address the committee. At the conclusion of the Minister's comments, a 60-minute speaking block for the official opposition begins, followed by 20 minutes speaking block for independent members, and if any, and I see there is, then 20-minute speaking block for the government caucus. Individuals may speak for up to 10 minutes at a time, but time may be combined with between the member and the minister. After this rotation of speaking time, will then follow the same rotation of the official opposition, independent members, and the government caucus. The member and the minister may each speak once for a maximum of 5 minutes, or these times may be combined, making it a 10-minute block. If members have any questions regarding speaking times or the rotation, please feel free to send an email or message to the committee clerk about the process. While the concurrence of the committee, I will call a 5-minute break near the midpoint of the meeting. However, the 3-hour clock will continue to run. Does anyone oppose having a break? Don't all speak at once. Ministry officials may be present and at the discretion of the minister may address the committee. Ministry officials seated in the gallery, if called upon, have access to a microphone in the gallery area and are asked to please introduce themselves for the record prior to commenting. Pages are available to deliver notes or other materials between the gallery and the table. Attendees in the gallery may not approach the table. Space permitting, opposition caucus staff may sit at the table to assist their members. However, members have priority to sit at the tables at all time. If debate is exhausted prior to 6 hours, the ministry's estimates are deemed to have been considered for the time allotted in the schedule and the committee will adjourn. Points of order will be dealt with as they arise, and individual speaking times will be paused. However, the speaking block time and the 3-hour meeting clock will continue to run. Any written materials provided in response to questions raised during the main estimates should be tabled by the Minister in the Assembly for the benefit of all members. The vote on the estimates and any amendments will occur in the Committee of Supply on March 21st, 2022. Amendments may be in writing and approved by Parliamentary Council prior to the meeting at which they are to be moved. The original amendment is to be deposited with the committee clerk with 20 hard copies. An electronic version of the signed original should be provided to the committee clerk for distribution to the members. Finally, the committee should have the opportunity to hear both questions and answers without interruption during estimates debate. Debates flow through the chair at all times, including instances when speaking time is shared between a member and the minister. I would now invite the Minister of Education to begin her opening remarks. Minister, you have 10 minutes.
Thank you so very much, and it is a great honor for me as Minister to be here to discuss Education's $8.4 billion 2022 budget and main estimates. I'll now give you a brief overview, as I've already introduced all of my team here with me today. I'm going to have to tell you I have an A team, so I'm very thankful to all the great people beside me and behind me that make education so great in Alberta. So I'd like to give you a brief overview of the commitments our government has made in the latest budget to ensure that all students can access an excellent education, while also ensuring we are prudent with the public money that we do spend. Budget 2022 is moving the province forward into a time of economic recovery and prosperity, where Albertans have opportunities to build their skills, pursue their passions, and support themselves and their families. Through Budget 2022, Alberta's government continues its strong support of the education system. We are increasing our investment in education to ensure students continue to receive a world-class education that enriches their lives and prepares them for success beyond school. I'm very pleased to say that operating support to education system as a whole will increase by more than $700 million over the next 3 years to support students and teachers and to address cost pressures. In 2022-2023, this increased funding will ensure school authorities can hire the required number of teachers and support staff, address increases in property and vehicle insurance premiums, build foundations for rewarding careers with updated curriculum, expand educational choice with additional opportunities in science, technology, engineering, mathematics, and the trades, and mitigate the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic on student learning. Acknowledging the challenges the pandemic caused, we will be holding school authorities' operational funding allocations harmless after unexpected enrollment fluctuations caused by the pandemic. This means that operational funding allocations for all school authorities will be the same or higher than the 21-22 school year. An important promise we made to Albertans during the last election was to maintain or increase funding, and that commitment remains strong. As always, our goal is to drive as many dollars as possible to the classroom and away from administrative costs. In fact, 94.7% of operational funding goes to public, separate, and francophone schools, who serve 92.2% of the total student population. Just 4.1% is allocated to independent schools and ECS operators, who serve about 6.3% of the students. And 1.2% of operational funding is allocated to support the 1.5% of Alberta students who choose to attend charter schools. The funding model continues to give school boards maximum flexibility in how they manage their resources, as they know how to best address their students' needs. Alberta students deserve a high-quality education that starts with stable, predictable funding for school authorities. We are increasing our strong operational support for the education system by investing an additional $142 million in 22-23, $269 million in 23-24, and $301 million in 24-25. No one could have predicted the lower enrollment experienced due to the pandemic. As everyone knows, more than $130 million in COVID mitigation funding was provided to school authorities in the current school year, funding that would have otherwise been removed from the system. As we move forward with the upcoming school years, we are committed to sustainable and predictable funding for enrollment growth. As I said earlier, we are continuing to hold harmless to the 2020-21 school year, where we saw significant and unpredictable fluctuations in enrollment. So to be clear, enrollment is less than what school boards have been projecting. Despite those lower enrollments, despite growing school board reserves, we are still maintaining funding to the system and adding funding for additional supports. So 3 major grants will receive rate increases beginning in September of 2022. We are increasing the base instruction rate, funding rate by 1% to help address cost pressures, such as staffing, inflation, and salary grid movement. We are also increasing the operations and maintenance rate by 1% to assist with rising property insurance premiums. The transportation grant will receive an additional $39 million over the next 3 years, which is a 4.6% rate increase. This will assist with vehicle insurance premiums, fuel costs, and new driver training. Additionally, as enrollment growth is realized in future years, it will be fully funded. We know the cost of enrollment growth is significant and that growth creates ongoing pressures in future years. This is part of our commitment to provide schools with the resources required to support safe learning for students. As you know, we are also continuing on updating the curriculum. The renewed curriculum will help prepare our students for a rapidly changing labour market, which is placing an ever-increasing premium on adaptability and transferable skills. As announced in December, implementation of the new K-6 curriculum will begin in September of 2022 with 3 subjects: mathematics, English language arts and literature, and physical education, physical education and wellness. Over the past few months, the single most frequent question I have received is how will we be supporting this implementation? And we will be supporting curriculum implementation with $191 million in curriculum funding over the next 3 years, including $59 million in year 1, which is the 22-23 year. This significant investment will cover resource development, the procurement of learning and teaching resources, and teacher professional learning. Further details on implementation will be shared soon. The pandemic has presented many challenges to students, educators, and parents. In particular, we have seen delays in student learning and mental health impacts. Students will need supports, whether for academic, social, emotional, or behavioral needs. I also heard this from many school authorities. That is why we are providing an additional $110 million over the next 3 years, including $30 million in year 1 to provide needed supports to address student well-being, learning gaps, and mental health. The funding will support wraparound services for the students who are most in need. We'll announce more details later this spring. Without a doubt, the K-12 education system plays a key role in preparing students for the world of work. Alberta's government is making sure students have every opportunity to pursue their chosen career path and personal interests and succeed in Alberta's dynamic job market. New funding will expand education opportunities for vocational education with focused programming in both the skilled trades and STEM fields under the Alberta at Work initiative. We are also providing more than $2 million to support dual credit and career and technology studies enhancements, with more details to be announced soon. This funding will support Alberta students' access to work-based learning and post-secondary credential opportunities in high school that bridge them to careers, trade designations, and to jobs. We will also invest $3 million over 3 years to provide financial literacy education to junior and senior high school students. Moving on to school infrastructure, work will continue on all projects underway, and the 2022 capital plan invests $2 billion over the next 3 years for school projects. This includes funding to support 15 priority school projects and continue work on the over 50 previously announced projects and maintain existing schools. $118 million over the next 3 years to support the continued implementation of the modular program to address the most urgent needs for additional space across this province. $209 million over 3 years to support the maintenance and renewal of existing school buildings through the CMR program, which is the Capital Maintenance and Renewal Program, and $300 million over 3 years in school authorities' self-directed capital projects. Our education funding model, with its weighted moving average, will also continue to ensure predictable, sustainable funding for school authorities. To conclude, I will stress again that all school authorities will be held harmless due to the pandemic, which means they will receive the same or more, if they are growing school divisions, in operational funding for the 22-23 school year. And so now I am happy to turn it back over to you, Chair.
Thank you, Minister. For the next 60 minutes, members of the official opposition and the minister may speak. Honourable members, you will be able to see the timer for the speaking block both in the committee room and on Microsoft Teams. Members, would you like to combine your time with the minister?
I'd be happy to do so. I think it usually leads to better dialogue and outcomes in the debate if the minister is willing.
Minister, what's your choice?
My choice is block timing.
All right, we'll go with block timing then.
Yep.
So it's 10 minutes at a time, Madam Chair?
Yes.
Okay. It's too bad. Maybe the minister will reconsider at a future time. I'll have her let me know if that's the case. And I want to begin by recognizing everyone who was involved in creating the budget. I know it takes a village, and thank you to them for being here to help us get more details. As I think the world's paying attention to what's happening in democracies around the world, I think one of the key pillars to a good parliamentary democracy is transparency, openness, and trust. So hopefully we can increase some of that here today and use it to help us make good decisions on behalf of Alberta students and the staff who serve them. I will start by the top outcome, I almost said learner outcome, but the top outcome in the business plan is around Alberta students being successful, and that really is the focus of what I'll be discussing here in this first chunk of time. And I will say that it shocked me when we were in the lockup this year, and there, not only in the budget documents wasn't a number for the projections of students for this upcoming school year, but officials were, for the first time in, I've been in many lockups, probably more than a decade worth of lockups. For the first time, officials didn't give us the number of students that were either currently registered in school or projections for the upcoming school year. So last year, the projection for the year that we're in currently was 726,000. I would like clarification on what the actual number is this year, because when we checked the website again most recently, only what was posted about 2 weeks ago. I didn't check again this morning. Perhaps it's been updated, and this will be a very quick answer, but the numbers that were posted publicly on Alberta Education's website were still projections for a school year that we're more than halfway through. So I'd like to have the responses begin with the number for the actuals, and within that, it would be very helpful for us to have a breakdown of at least Division 1, 2, and 3, but particularly, as we know, last year, a significant number, as the minister mentioned in her opening remarks, of students who were projected to come to school didn't come to school. And it was reported that the majority of that was students whose families didn't register them for kindergarten, for a variety of reasons. One of the biggest ones that the ministers acknowledged is their desire to keep their children safe. So I think an important question for the framing about are we setting Alberta students up for success would be how many actually registered for kindergarten this year, and if all of those students who were projected to be in kindergarten last year did indeed register for grade 1 this year. So the breakdown in the early years I think is an important piece, but also the Division 1, 2, and 3 numbers I think would be very important for us to be able to be aware of is Alberta Education, is the minister setting students up for success, outcome 1. I will stay in the fiscal plan for a little bit, and at this point I'm going to draw your attention to Schedule 21. It's definitely, in this year's fiscal plan, it's on page 212. It's probably different by plus or minus 5 pages in prior years. But on Schedule 21, it's titled Full-Time Equivalents, and it's broken down by a variety of ministries as well as agencies and the such sector. So that includes schools when you're looking at education. So it has the number of certificated staff, so those would be teacher certificates, so the number of certificated staff, and it also has the number for non-certificated staff. And we compare this year's certificated staff number that's published in the government's fiscal plan to prior Schedule 21 fiscal plans. We see that there's a net reduction of almost 1,000 teachers in Alberta schools just in the time that the current government has been leading the education system. So would certainly say that that will make it very difficult for us to achieve our goals around students being successful with far greater needs, as the minister's highlighted, given the chaos that students have endured over the last few years in particular, as well as the reduced staff complement to support those students. So can the minister explain why under her government there are about 1,000 fewer teachers working with students than there were prior? And what does this decline in the number of teachers say about the government's commitment to providing the best education to the youngest Albertans? What does it say about the government's decision to remove class size reporting, which was done in the province of Alberta for many, many years? I think that parents have been able to draw very clear conclusions over the last 3 years, and I think if we want to, and I sincerely hope we all do, achieve outcome one and high levels of success for all students, making sure that they have adults working with them, specifically certificated teachers and educational assistants, will be key to that. In the business plan, there's also a key objective 3.2, so it's the next page of the business plan. And 3.2 talks about bolstering the teaching workforce in high demand regions and high need subject areas. And that's a very broad target, but the performance metric related to that is around, there's only one, and it's around standard of acceptable and standard of excellence on achievement tests for math and language arts. So what would bolster the teaching workforce mean to the minister? Can the minister tell us what over the last 3 fiscal years, what the student to teacher ratio was? And can the minister tell this committee what the student to teacher ratio is expected to be for the periods of the business plan, so 22-23, 23-24, 24-25. So what is the target that we're actually going to be measuring that objective? And I did mention this last year. I have to say that the significant reduction in the actual business plan, the core business plan, in terms of specifically the metrics, having one metric that doesn't feel related to most of the actual key objectives is, I think, highly problematic. And there are many people who've rightfully said, if something's important to you, you measure it. And I would say if something's important to building trust, you should also report it. So questions around the class size generally, or rather the student to teacher ratio for the 3 years the minister has currently been in the position she's in, as well as the next 3 years, through you, Madam Chair, would certainly, I think, help address some of the trust concerns that parents and staff have raised with me. So measuring class size and reporting was something that was done consistently by prior Conservative and NDP governments, but has been eliminated under the UCP. So a response on why that was done and how that is in any way going to increase trust or confidence when it comes to the government caring about class size, student teacher ratios, and the success of students in their opportunities to learn from certificated professionals. Many parents have raised class sizes with me specifically as an issue that they're concerned about. So can the minister tell the committee again about those? I asked for the general roll-up numbers, but I think it would also be important for specifically divisions 1, 2, and 3, in line with the Commission on Learning report that set targets and ranges for those years. And in preparation for the current budget that we are considering, did the ministry attempt to undertake any analysis of the significant learning loss that we all know happened over the last 2 years? I regularly hear from parents who talk about one her daughter started in kindergarten in 2019 and hasn't had a year where she's been consistently able to go to school and have stability in her education. So not knowing anything different, obviously we can't say that she lost learning. Learning isn't something that you find or you lose, but she certainly had opportunities that were taken away from her that could have resulted in increased opportunities to have a positive educational experience. So what kind of analysis is actually being done on learning loss and the impacts of COVID-19 to date? And what is the minister actually going to do to bring students back up to the standard we were at previously? Definitely class size, educational assistance, and enhanced supports for one-on-one opportunities, not just in grades 2 and 3, but in all years would be fundamental. And if the ministry didn't look specifically into learning loss here, have they done interjurisdictional comparative analysis to see what other places across Canada and in the West and really internationally have done?
Thank you, Honourable Member. We'll then go over to the Minister for response.
Thank you very much for those very good questions, and I will try and cover all of my responses to all of those questions as quickly as possible. 10 minutes isn't very much time, and I do want to start. The reason I'm wearing yellow and blue is obviously our allegiance with the Ukraine. Our thoughts and prayers are with all of them, and I know the members opposite and everyone here in this room sends their thoughts and prayers as they go through a very tragic time, and you're absolutely right. The member opposite for sharing that, in fact, the hallmarks of a great democracy is the education that they have, and having a good, strong education system is something that we value. And obviously our government values it very much because we have increased by over $700 million, and I'll be happy to go into the details. The first question in terms of the success of our students, well, of course, to have a well-funded education system will ensure that we have the supports and the resources that students require to make them successful. Student numbers have been updated, and I know that this is probably slightly later than it has happened in other years because of something that we strategically did to support our students with special needs. We've allowed for assessments to take place right up until the 1st of December every year now. So that does skew some of the numbers. So we needed to make sure that our numbers were accurate. And so therefore we have those numbers up to date, and they are on the website, but I'm happy to table the projection numbers and the headcount numbers that have been put forward. I can share with and I can use names, right? Okay, I can share with MLA Hoffman that you are in fact correct that the projection for the 21-22 school year was 726,000 students. And I just want to back up just a wee bit, because last year when we were in estimates, I was able to point out that while we were funding to the projected headcount, and this is what we're funding, we're holding harmless, we're funding 730,000 students and 30. So 730,030 students are funded under the projected headcount for 2020, even though in 2020, 2021, we only had 705,917 students attend school. We are holding harmless again for the 21-22 year, while the projection was 726,654. The actual count was 716,868. So we're still funding 730,000 students, actual in bums and seats, so to speak, in the 21-22 year is 716,868. So those numbers are indeed up, and you are right to share that kindergarten numbers were the numbers that were most affected. We are still having school authorities do their registrations for kindergarten, so I do not have those numbers at this point in time. Anything I missed from my team before I go on? Okay. Schedule 221 on the 1,000 teachers. If the members of the opposition took a proper read through the budget, they would see that in fact there is 160 more school staff next year, including over 100 new teachers. The projection is just that, a projection. The members of the opposition know that the government does not hire or in fact fire teachers. School boards do this. The facts are that with increase in funding and our commitment to once again protect school boards from their over projections due to COVID, the math on 1,000 fewer teachers next year just does not make sense. The facts are that the budget projects more teachers, not less. Government spending on education is up $700 million over 3 years, and school boards hire and fire teachers, not our government. And again, school boards are also sitting on almost $500 million in reserves. And I just want to draw your attention, and maybe some of you already know this because I have mentioned it in question period and beyond. At the start of the pandemic, school board reserves were sitting at $363 million. As of August 21st, or August of 2021, August 31st of 2021, they are sitting at $464 million, an increase. A significant increase, I might add. So we have always, and it's always been my aim that more dollars get pushed to the front lines, because that's where you have a significant impact on students, teachers, and educational assistants. So again, the reality is that Alberta's education system and Alberta's public school boards remain extremely well funded, and the decision to increase or decrease staffing is theirs. My job is to ensure that they have those dollars available, and then they make those staffing decisions for their school authorities. On class sizes, yes, there was a class size audit, which in fact showed that we had spent $3 billion without actually addressing the issue. And so we did look at how we could, as we know, complexity is not just class sizes alone do not affect the classroom environment. It's the complexity within the classroom. So you could have a very small class size, but if you have very high needs students in that class, then that becomes problematic. And so we are continuing to work with school authorities, and the best way we can assist school authorities to reduce class sizes and to ensure that they have the proper resources and supports is to increase funding for special needs, which we have done. Last year, I added an additional $40 million. We're sitting at over $1.4 billion in our special needs funding, which is the learning special learning fund. And beyond that, we are continuing to add to the overall budgets of school authorities, and we've held them harmless when they've lost student numbers. So there's many things that we're continuing to do to address that particular issue. On bolstering the teaching workforce, again, school authorities have the availability, the autonomy to do what they need to do for their school authorities. We know that in education, 98% of all the funding of my overall budget goes directly to school authorities, so that they can make sure that they have the right staffing configuration, that they also have the supports and what they need to ensure that their students are successful. On learning loss, we have been looking at this very closely. As the member opposite knows, in last spring, we had assessments done in the early years. We continue to look at that feedback. We added an additional $45 million. This was up and above all of the funding that we had already included. So $45 million went to address learning gaps within our education system for grades 1 to 3. And I have been hearing great results from that. I was at a school last Friday where the whole focus of the school, and it was a Calgary public school, it was an elementary school. They took me around to show me the strategies that they're utilizing, and to great effect to counteract that. As well, we're looking at, we've been working with superintendents, who of course are the administrators overseeing their school authorities, working with them to find out where are the gaps, where are the needs. And as you know, I've allocated $110 million over 3 years to look at addressing gaps, but also looking at mental health and wellness within our students. That's up and above, and we want to leverage those dollars by working, as far as mental health supports go, by working with other ministries as well. We also started the e-tutoring hub for grades 4 to 12 to provide another support system, a support for teachers and for parents to work with their children to address any gaps that may have occurred. But again, we are continuing to keep close eye on this, looking to make sure that we have what is required and continue to assess where necessary and provide supports where needed as well. Is there anything that anyone, my team, would like to add in this regard? Andre, is there anything you'd want to add?
Sure, just really quickly, just to pick up on Minister's comment, in spring of 2021, we actually rolled out 2 assessment tools for grades 1, 2, and 3, just to get a better understanding of how students were doing during the pandemic. And that actually helped form the foundation of the $40 million that the minister just referred to that went directly to school authorities to provide pull-out services to students that may be actually struggling with basic literacy and numeracy. We know that those 3 grades are quite critical in terms of building a foundation for kids long-term in the school system. And so providing those assessment tools for free to school authorities really helped school authorities to understand what might be happening in those early grades, which ultimately helped us with that overall programming that went out just before Christmas, and there's another round of.
Well, that's good and loud, isn't it? Thank you to the minister's team. Back over to the member.
Again, just to clarify, there's 2 more blocks like this, is that correct in the first rotation?
Yes,
Okay.
and so you can see on the big screens here, the
40,
that's
yeah.
the full remaining time, and then your time is the red allotted.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So just to, again, piece together the last section of responses to the opening remarks, the minister noted that the base funding grant is only going up by 1% in the opening remarks. And just now through the sharing of this year's actual at 716,000 students, and the projection that was mentioned by the minister, 730,030. That is more than 1% increase just to enrollment numbers. And in the opening remarks, the minister said that base funding grant was supposed to include things like contract negotiations and other increased needs. If she didn't say that, I'm happy for her to clarify. That is what I recall in her opening remarks around the base grant and what it was to include. But certainly if that wasn't what she intended to say, I'm happy to receive accurate information, because it definitely won't be sufficient to address significant increased learning needs that have been mentioned were negatively impacted, particularly over the last 2 years. Increased enrollment of greater than 1% for this upcoming school year. And obviously there are contract negotiations that have been awaiting the government's attention for quite some time. Not to mention the increased need for significant investment in mental health. I don't think any parent I've heard from in recent memory has said that their child is doing better in terms of their mental health now than they were 2 years ago. And certainly there was a lot of work still to do then, and I think we did address some of it, but not to the scope that we need to as a society. So back to the question that I led off on, tabling the actual enrollment numbers for each of those divisions, in particular the kindergarten numbers, or reading it in during the next exchange into the record. Either would be acceptable. I would really appreciate to have the information, though, that isn't available today prior to being expected to vote on the main estimates. I think it's only fair to all members that we have the information to back up the budget before we're asked to make a decision about the budget. So lastly, we talked about learning loss and looking at other jurisdictions that have taken upon them to enhance opportunities for students to make up those gaps. And ultimately, we're looking for some information around assessments that have been done and other programs that are going to be launched, because the ones to date certainly haven't been sufficient. So if the ministry could speak to this or table it with the committee at the end, it would be appreciated. Also, a significant issue that relates to some of the information that was just shared. I absolutely read Schedule 21. I saw the net number that was reported there. I also looked at Schedule 21 for the last 3 budgets, and that's the comparison is between what the certificated teacher number was prior to the current government being elected, the UCP being elected, and what the certificated teacher number is in the budget being proposed. So it's not just looking at Schedule 21 from this year, but it's looking at Schedule 21 going back 3 years. So what I'm looking for ultimately are some answers about the teacher shortages that we've been experiencing. And while the minister is correct in saying that she doesn't sign contracts with teaching staff, that is district, or what was called the district now is being called division. school divisions that sign those contracts. The minister certainly has a responsibility in accordance with the actual business plan outlined here to address the educational needs, and specifically one of the key objectives or key objectives 3.2 is around the teaching workforce. So the minister puts that as one of the targets, one of the outcomes. It would be fair for the minister to report to us on what tools will be used to deliver our desire to bolster the number of teachers in the workforce, which is one of her objectives for this upcoming year. Also, we know that there have been significant substitute teacher shortages. We've seen this reported repeatedly over the last 2 years, and especially during the waves of Delta and Omicron. And it would be important for us to receive information on what's going to be done to bolster the substitute teaching supply. I know that most divisions still are not hiring substitute teachers at present, given their budgetary pressures. So what's being done to address the issues and what lessons have been learned from the significant staffing shortages that schools and in turn students experienced over the last 2 years. Most parents and staff have told me that they want the education system to provide smaller class sizes, more educational assistance, improved access to technology and digital supports. Instead, outcome 1, key objective on page 31 of the business plan, 2 of the 4 measures under Alberta Students Are Successful are about standardized provincial assessments. One is about implementing grade 1 and 2 assessments in language arts and math, and the second one is about modernizing online assessment capabilities. So my key question would be, what groups or individuals said that this should be the government's key focus, because it definitely hasn't been a dominant theme that parents have been raising with me, or school staff, or school divisions for that matter. So who's been lobbying for 2 of the 4 key objectives related to student success being focused around standardized assessments, and particularly provincial assessments for grade 1 and grade 2 students, 6 and 7-year-olds, many who we pushed back hard as a society to remove the requirement for PATs in grade 3. That was led by a UCP, or rather a PCMLA, and that was supported by all sides of the House. And now we've certainly seen a significant move in the opposite direction. That was Gina Lescu who moved that, Lescu, who moved that motion, and the government followed in turn. So why is it that we're pushing so hard for provincial assessment? I think that we all know that if you have more teachers able to work with 6 and 7-year-olds, you'll be able to have a greater real-time, authentic, lived experience assessment in a classroom and be able to tailor instruction to those learner needs. Okay. The only metrics for outcomes 1 or 2, again, in the business plan, key objective 1 is Alberta students are successful. 2 is First Nations, Métis, and Inuit students in Alberta are successful. The only measurements with regard to those are high school completion rates, which I think are one important measure, but often they are many years delayed from when we would like to see real-time impacts on those goals. So the metrics are certainly problematic, and I would like to know why it is that the government's reduced the number of metrics so substantially, and why it is that only these 2 remain when they really don't have a direct impact to many of the key objectives. How implementing a grade 1 standardized assessment can be measured by looking at high school completion rates. They are completely disconnected, and you're not measuring your impact on the objective if you have a performance measure that's completely out of line. And in terms of outcome 4, key objectives around being well-managed and well-governed education system, safe, caring, and healthy we're in the we would like to have some reporting on the most recent year's actuals. Those are things that we always measure around student, staff, and family member sense of safe, caring, and healthy student learning environments. So what were the actuals for 2018 through present on the safe, caring, and healthy assessment? And how do we determine if the targets that are actually here, performance metric 4A, if those targets are aggressive enough, or if they're in line? So having information on where those performance metrics 4A have been 2018 to present, I think will give us an understanding of if we're reaching far enough or if our reach is out of whack. So receiving information on where those assessments have landed, I think would be incredibly important. I will take just the last 40 seconds in this section to speak generally to the frustration that so many families with students who are disabled felt in particular over the last 2 years. An equity education, of course, includes having access to the right supports to be successful, and that certainly wasn't the case when the more than 20,000 education workers were given notice by the minister of their termination through a tweet on a Saturday, and it didn't create an opportunity for us to focus on equity and actually support the students who have the most complex needs. So that is something that I would like to hear the minister respond to, and what she's doing this budget to correct that.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Now back to the Minister for response.
Thank you so much, and a lot of areas to cover there, so certainly happy to answer these questions. On the base funding, we are increasing base funding to 1%. The member opposite did talk to the fact that we are seeing inflation and all the rest of it, and I'm happy to actually share with MLA Hoffman that in fact we are still funding way above enrollment growth and inflation. And I have a chart before me that I'm happy to share with all the members here, copies, that in 2004 to 2005 to 2018-2019, operational funding increased by 80% in education, while enrollment growth increased by 25% and inflation by 33%. So 80% in comparisons to enrollment growth and inflation at 25 and 33. From 2006 to 2021, we saw operational funding increase by 61% in comparison to enrollment growth of 23% and inflation of 29%. And in 2007, 2008 school year to 21-22, we see operational funding increases of 48%, whereas enrollment growth grew by 24%, inflation by 26%. So again, a very, you can look at the curve that is still, we're funding way above what the operational funding increases are way above what enrollment growth and inflation is as a standard. So the other thing that I can share is that in the 2019 McKinnon panel report, it found Alberta's per capita spending was higher in Canada, and despite the higher levels of that Alberta's per capita was higher than anywhere in Canada, despite the higher levels of funding, the outcomes were not any better, and in some instances worse than other provinces. So we are then looking to ensure that we have, we want to make sure we have a well-funded education system, but we're also wanting to ensure that we're getting good value for dollar. For that education system. There was a question around mental health, and yes, we have seen that mental health concerns have increased over the last 2 years, particularly throughout the pandemic in our young people. And I'm so proud that our province was the first province to put funding out there, and in fact at one point we were higher than any other provinces combined in mental health funding of $53 million as a province. A good portion of that went to supports within our young people. The Kids Help Phone, we added additional supports in JAT.org and so many other supports during that time period. I know that school boards focused on this as well. Again, that's why it was very important for me to add an additional $40 million in last year's overall funding envelope for special needs, because we know they did feel more of the challenges, and we continue to provide that support. To continue that on, it was important to add an additional $110 million over 3 years. So it's $30 million this year and $40 million in each of the next following years on that particular front. Am I missing anything before I move on to the next? Okay. And I'm very proud of the fact that when the member opposite was asking about interjurisdictional supports and scans, that we were one of the very first provinces to start addressing learning gaps and learning issues. We did assessments last spring when other provinces hadn't even returned to school yet. Their children weren't even in school yet. Ours were back in school, and we were looking to address those learning gaps. We added $45 million. We started with grades 2 and 3 in the fall. We are now in the process of grade 1, providing those supports to grade 1. And that was because we were listening to the system, to the education system, those on the ground telling us that early intervention in these early years are going to make the most significant impact. They will have the most significant impact in addressing the gaps as well as setting up the students for future success. We heard from the system they wanted to delay the supports for grade 1 because they wanted those children, some of who did not attend school the previous year, if they were not in kindergarten, because we did see lower numbers in kindergarten, that they entered grade 1. They wanted those children to acclimatize, that they would be able to then be able to have some training and some supports for those children to get used to being in the classroom before they actually assess them. So the assessments took place here in January. And then we have now supported them through the funding. The funding's gone out so that school authorities can now, and the way they were supporting them was actually hiring additional teachers or educational assistants or subs so that those teachers could do a small group training with those students. They could take those students out and do targeted supports. And as I said earlier, I was in a elementary school just on Friday, last Friday, and my gosh, the work that's going on and how well those students are doing and getting back up to speed is incredible. And it was the one thing as I went and toured the classrooms that the principal and all the teachers were just very, very supportive of the programs that we have put in place. In fact, we have been very fortunate to have Dr. Giorgio, who is world-renowned and who the Alberta Teachers Association have given awards to for all of his work that he has done in the early years in literacy. And that is really making a huge impact, and we're utilizing a lot of the work that he's done in our new K-6 curriculum, particularly in the early years in literacy. So again, there's a lot of great things going on, and happy to continue sharing more and more about that, as I'm sure there will be more questions as we move forward. Addressing teacher numbers, again, I believe I answered that before, on that in fact by our numbers, that those numbers are going up, providing school boards with all the additional supports in dollars, $700 million over, as I said, 3 years. When we look at the number of substitute teachers as well, that number did go down during the pandemic. And as everyone knows, oftentimes substitute teachers are teachers who've retired, who still want to continue on in the profession, giving back and perhaps earning a little extra income, but oftentimes they are older teachers, and I know there was a hesitancy and there was some concern by older teachers during the pandemic, as there was in every other field right across the province. One thing that I can share that is going to help with our overall numbers is to graduate more teachers, because if I know right now that many school authorities do have advertisements looking for teachers to hire, and I know that post-secondary, particularly Red Deer Polytechnic, has now received the opportunity to provide a full Bachelor of Education program, so there's going to actually be more teachers that are going to go through that post-secondary program and graduate and be accessible to the system as a whole. So I know that there's many opportunities for school authorities utilizing the dollars that they have, and I know that they have growing reserves, and I like to see school board reserves healthy. That being said, we have always advocated that those dollars be utilized to full impact, and where they can be best impacted is in the classroom. Teachers, educational assistants in the classroom are certainly going to make the difference. On outcome one, digital, one of the mentions, I've addressed teachers and EAs. So another item mentioned was digital support, connectivity. And we know as a province, when we had to transition to online learning, the connectivity was a huge, huge concern. And so we've navigated through that, but it also showed the gaps that we have. And just recently, the Minister of Service Alberta was able to share that we are going to be spending over $300 million to improve connectivity across this province, and particularly in our rural areas, where I know firsthand, being a farmer myself, that it can be spotty. And when you have children that are requiring that from time to time, that it is problematic. So $300 million that will also have some federal matching to it is going to be stretched so that we can actually deal with some of the connectivity issues in this province and provide more digital support for our students. In terms of the goals on high school completion rates, we were asked to trim down, and this was a number of budgets ago, to trim down our number of goals, but that are actually in the budget. But they can be found online. The full complement of those goals can be found online, because we have so many more goals in education. I always hate having just these short and small number.
Thank you, Minister, and back over to the member.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Through you to the Minister, I'm going to do the next chunk all on capital pressures that boards are facing. This relates to the business plan, page 65, initiative supporting key objectives, where there's discussion about the dollar amounts as well as the modular and new builds, as well as modernizations. And also it relates to the capital plan, page 159. And I'm just going to read one sentence here. It says, these projects will support enrollment growth in communities that continue to see population growth, preserve and modernize existing facilities, and consolidate underutilized space, thereby reducing maintenance costs in those communities experiencing enrollment or population decline. And this has been one of the constant frustrations, I think, for many school authorities throughout the province, is that when they don't get enough money through general capital enhancements or plan operations and maintenance or infrastructure maintenance and renewal funds, money is inevitably taken away from instructional supports, so teachers, educational assistants, and move towards having to maintain buildings that are not in an appropriate state for safe learning opportunities. So I'm going to go through a few school districts, and the really great thing is that they are all posted publicly. Capital plans, 3-year capital plans are posted publicly, and I want to highlight some of the projects that were submitted to the minister, but that aren't being funded at all in this budget. And for context, during the time that of the previous government, during those 4 years, there were on average 60 projects every year, and we've had about 60 projects total under the current government. This year, the government's reported 15 projects, but only 11 of those are either actual modernization funds or new build funds. The other 4 are around planning. So it is a significant decline from the kind of investment in capital that Albertans needed and still need, given the significant neglect of critical infrastructure, including schools, for so many years under conservative austerity budgets. So the one that probably has received the most attention here in our capital city is the Edmonton Public Capital Plan. And the very first project certainly relates to underutilized space, as highlighted in the capital plan, page 156. Their number one ask was around Delton School for replacement, the ministers highlighted in the media that that school isn't at capacity. And that's exactly one of the things that they want to address is the size of the building and the quality of the building to make sure that kids who go to get Delton School will have an excellent opportunity for an education. And they can stop spending money that should be directed towards in-school instruction on maintaining a building that's beyond its life cycle. There was another replacement school. And again, just for framing, districts are asked to submit 3 different capital plans. One is for new builds, one is for modernizations, and the third is for their consolidated. So there are 3 different lists that get submitted, and it definitely, in past years, we've seen times where maybe a modernization wouldn't be funded, which was number 1, but a new build would be funded, which was number 1 on the new build list. So using only the consolidated or aggregated 3-year capital plan to justify not giving public school students in Edmonton any new infrastructure, I think is disingenuous. So to highlight again some of the key projects, Delta number 1, Spruce Ave number 2, McConaughey, which is in northeast Edmonton, desperately needs a junior high, capacity of nearly 1,000 because kids in that area are being bused far and for a long period of time. Glenridding Heights in South Edmonton, desperate need of a junior-senior high. Not a typical build, but because it's needed schools for about the last 3 years in that area. Now they've put in a request for a combined grade 7 through 12, 2,400 students. For context, that's about the size of Jasper Place High School or Harry Ainley High School, like large building in desperate need. And I think that by neglecting Edmonton public students, it actually does say something about where the government and particularly the minister stands on actual school choice. I want to begin by saying how grateful I am that we are getting some kind of building. And Catholic schools are great for parents who want to choose Catholic education, but there are many parents who also want to choose a public education, and they deserve to have an investment in their school choice as well, if the government wants to actually use that frame to try to justify the decisions that they're making around funding. In addition to the 2 projects that were announced for Edmonton Catholic, they also need a new school for Heritage Valley. That would be a K-9, and they also need a replacement school that in the areas of St. Jerome and St. Bernadette. So there are still projects in the year 1 capital plan that haven't been funded even when those 2 have been. And these plans don't come out of thin air. Extensive work goes into informing the work and the decision that goes into those. Sorry, my CO2 monitor is not happy with the air quality in this room, so I'll turn it off. Calgary Public desperately needs Diefenbaker High School modernization, Nichols School grades 5 to 9 a modernization, Saddle Ridge in Northeast Calgary is a proposal for a 5 to 9 for brand new. And again, these are areas of the city that continue to grow and are far underserved in terms of their needs for new schools that I'm highlighting. Cornerstone needs a new high school. Calgary Catholic, Nolan Hill, kindergarten to grade 9, we need a new school. Walden, kindergarten to grade 9, we need a new school. We also have heard, I'm sure the minister's heard many, many times about the desperate need for a Catholic high school in West Calgary. This is something that is long overdue. And then they also had modernizations for St. Bonaventure and St. Teresa of Calcutta in just their year 1 plans. And this many projects would have been consistent with approximately the number of projects that we had under the NDP government's time when we were doing about 60 projects a year as opposed to 11 that are being actually funded in this project. And again, I want to acknowledge there are 4 planning projects, but I'm talking about actual construction projects. So significant losses for the 4 largest districts, which again are growing, which the capital plan says that they will continue to see population growth, that there will be schools and new communities that continue to see population growth. But clearly this budget doesn't come close to addressing the needs that we have in just the 4 largest metros. I'm also going to highlight a couple of other schools that I know are in desperate need of renovation or modernization or replacement. One is with Holy Family Catholic. Their number 1 ask is for St. Andrews and High Prairie to be replaced. And that's something that's been on their list for a very long time. And I know that the people of High Prairie were hoping they'd see some movement on that, but none in this budget here. And also recently I met with the Francophone school boards, And two of the 5 boards, the one that represents the north, the far north, the number one number one need is for a Francophone school in Fort McMurray. And for the one that's, for the school division that's slightly south of there, their number one need is for a Francophone school in Lac La Biche. So I guess the question that many are asking me is, how can the government continue to neglect these areas where equity is such a deep concern? The Francophone community certainly has brought forward reparations that need to be done according to obviously justice, but also to court cases that went through the justice system around access to Francophone learning opportunities, and those 2 projects were, I think many were expecting to see them in this capital plan, but there's nothing. There's also mention in the text around capital for charter schools and capital for collegiates. And I think that Albertans deserve some clarity on what collegiates mean to this minister. I know there was a time where there was a proposal for a collegiate between Edmonton Public, Edmonton Catholic, and NATE. But that certainly would be, a public under a public Catholic Francophone educational opportunity. But in this budget, the language has been grouped with charters. So is the minister proposing something outside of the public Catholic and Francophone system for capital investment? And those weren't listed in the 15 that were announced last Friday. So where would this money be coming from for additional capital for projects that aren't public Catholic or Francophone? And what's the burning pressure on this, and why is it something that's not actually broken up into a line item? And if it is part of an aggregated line item, what line item would that be? But ultimately, my main thrust of this is that there is a significant sense of injustice in the way that capital is being doled out under the current UCP government, and that it is not keeping up with growth. It isn't acknowledging that there are old buildings in need of retirement and to be replaced by adequately sized buildings.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Now back over to the Minister's team.
Well, thank you so much, and I would have to disagree with what has been shared because it just shows that I believe the member opposite doesn't understand the capital process. In fact, which is kind of surprising because I do believe the member opposite was a school board trustee. She should understand that, in fact, we have $2 billion in flux right at the moment. When she stated that they put forward 60 projects a year, those were not 60 new projects. Those are done over a time span. And if we're using those numbers, in fact, we have 66. Our government has 66 projects, including the 15 that were announced. So when we look at the process, it's a very robust process. It's a gated process. It is one that the Auditor General recommended and was accepted in 2018 under the previous government. It is there's 10 gates. I'm happy to go through all of the details on that, but I think I want to share some other information, and towards the end, if I have some time, I will certainly look to share that. As far as modulars go, we have spent the most in modulars in any particular time in government. Last year I announced just shy of $90 million for modulars. Unfortunately, due to labor shortages, which is labor shortages, as well as the fact that there was supply chain issues, we haven't been able to have all of those completed, but we expect that they will be completed in short order here. But we are spending over the 3 years $117 million in modulars. When it comes to Francophone school authorities, I'm happy to state that since 2019, there have been 6 new schools announced for Francophone school authorities right across this province. In the last decade, in fact, we have had 21 new schools built for the Francophone community because we take our obligation, our legal obligation, very, very seriously. We want to make sure that those students do have the supports necessary. They also were part of the modular program, and very, very happy to, and I can go into details as to which schools were announced in previous years and what they have received and how we will continue to support our Francophone community. As we support every school community, the member opposite would know, MLA Hoffman would know, that we receive just shy of 400 requests from all school authorities right across this province every single year. And of course, we have to go through that gated, very robust process, and I'm happy to detail that very soon, and ensure that the projects that rise to the top of the list are the ones that are in fact needed the most. And I am happy to say that we have announced 15 new projects. I was surprised to see Edmonton Public wasn't on the list, that they did not make the cut. And as the member duly noted, that particular school, that was their number one, was not a enrollment growth in an enrollment growth area. In fact, it has 69% utilization rate, and it was not a health and safety issue. But so I did a little more digging, and I'm a person who likes numbers, and so I did a little more digging, and the member would probably know these numbers. In 2016, I'm talking about completed schools. In 2016, Edmonton Public received completed 5 brand new schools. In 2017, Edmonton Public completed 10 new schools, came online. In 2018, they had 3 new schools completed. In 2019, they had 2 new schools completed. In 2020, they had 3 new schools completed. In August of 2021, so last August, there are currently 6 projects underway for Edmonton Public School Division. I looked at their jurisdictional current capacity. That is the number of student spaces they have available in Edmonton. Right now, they have 131,746 student spaces available. Their projected enrollment for 2022 is 107,337 students. So they have significantly more space available. And this doesn't include the modulars that we have allocated to that school. And as I said, we made record investments in modulars. Edmonton Public was the happy recipient of a number of those modulars. I don't have the number right offhand, but I'm hopeful to have that shortly. That, again, can address enrollment areas, pressures in certain locations. And so the way the system works through the gated process, which the Auditor General recommended, was in fact that school divisions who put their priorities, then it goes through the system. If it was a priority for the school authority to have a new school in a growing community, they would have put that as their number 1, or at the very least their number 2. In this particular case, I believe it's number 3, perhaps even number 4 or further down. Again, it has to, when we have so many demands, so many issues, if it isn't a health and safety issue, if it isn't addressing enrollment growth, if it hasn't passed all of those pieces, then obviously there are other pressures that we need to address, and it appears that there is a great deal of capacity up and above student enrollment numbers. The only thing I can imagine is that perhaps, and I don't believe that this, hopefully this isn't the reason why, that they didn't put that particular school as number 1, the one that's in the high enrollment area, the high school that the member had mentioned, and I'm sorry I don't have the name of it in front of me, which is the McConaughey School. That perhaps it's because there's so much space in other schools that they would prefer to bus their students to those other schools rather than put that as their number 1. That's, you know, that is an assumption, and maybe it's a wrong assumption. But again, we are looking at ensuring that all school authorities have schools built in areas that are needed. And some of the projects that, and I'm going to read you some of the projects that were announced this year, because I do believe there is real value for education in Alberta as a result of it. Like a solution for Evansburg and Wildwood, sorry. It's taking older schools and a couple of older schools that have reached the end of their lifespan and ensuring that a new school is built to support students right across their jurisdiction. There's a solution for Milk River for the Horizon School Division. So the one that I mentioned earlier, the Grand Yellowhead School Division, Public School Division, solution for Evansburg. The Horizon School Division, solution for Milk River. The Peace River School Division is a solution for Manning. It's helping those rural communities who are seeing at times enrollment decline, ensure that they have a new modern facility for their students to learn in, and also addressing where you have schools that, as I said earlier, have reached the end of their lifespan, need perhaps, rather than having 2 or 3 schools here, there, and everywhere, they're moving into one more modernized location. In Northern Gateway School Division, the solution for Valley View, the Westwind School Division, a new high school in Raymond, the new elementary and junior high school in Legacy, the new middle school in Evanston, which are both in Calgary, those 2 schools, the Edmonton new school in Lewis Farm, Secord, modernization and addition of the Acme School, and a modernization and addition of the Bow Valley High School for Rocky View School Division. The new high school in Camrose for Elk Island Catholic School Division, and the new high school in Castle Downs, Dunluce, which is in MLA Hoffman's counterparts area for the opposition. So again, these are 15 schools in addition to the 51 projects already going on in this province. We are committed to ensuring that our students are in excellent, safe learning environments, which requires new schools, major modernizations, modulars added when they're needed, so that those communities can grow and then shrink when those communities get older. And we continue to provide resources through the Capital Maintenance and Renewal Fund, the Infrastructure Maintenance and Renewal Fund, Operations and Maintenance Funding, which will see a 1% increase. All of these to ensure that our schools are as up to date and as functional as possible for our students, that they're clean, safe spaces.
Thank you, Minister. That concludes the first portion of questions for the official opposition. We'll now move over to independent members for 20 minutes. But before we proceed, I just wanted to give you an update. I hear there will be fresh coffee after the government members do their questions, so something to look forward to. Go ahead, member. Would you like to combine your minister with time, or combine your time with the minister?
Yes, please, Minister. Is it okay to go back and forth and combine our time?
I'd rather go with block funding still, please.
Right, we'll go
Thank
block.
you.
Proceed, member.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate it, and thank you, Minister, and thanks to you and your entire department for all the work you do for Alberta families and Alberta children in particular. I want to start with your key objective 1.3 and 1.1 on page 31. 1.3, implement grades 1 and 2 assessments in language and math to help assess progress in the critical early years. 1.1 is a little more inclusive for K to 6. I'm wondering, we've talked a lot about money today. We always talk a lot about money in education, and I want to talk about the value that we're getting for the $9 billion annually already that the Alberta contributor, the Alberta taxpayer pays. It's up $600 million from just 2 years ago, and I've heard that enrollment has been static the last 2 years, from 705 to maybe 716,000 children, and a $600,000 increase. Now, unfortunately, a lot of my information and where I'm coming from is anecdotal, but it's where I have to start. I've heard from some experts, some teachers, and some curriculum developers that unfortunately Canadian curriculum and Alberta success of our children has slipped from the top rankings in the world to maybe as low as 28th in the world when we measure our children compared to children around the world. And when I've talked to these same experts about K to 6, a lot of them say that numeracy and literacy in grade 2, 3, and 4 especially, as many as 35% of our children are not up to standard or not up to world competition, and that's horrific. I know a few teachers, and I called them and I said, could this be true? Could it be 35% of our K to 6, our grade 2 and 3s, are 35% behind in literacy and numeracy? And the answer I got was yes. So I would love to hear a different story on that. I'm pleased to hear that you guys have recognized it. I did hear Deputy Minister Tremblay, I believe it was $40 million going into early intervention for K1, 2, and 3. We're spending $9 billion already. What's 40 million more going to do without the right target, without the right measurement, without the right outcomes? So I'd like to hear more about, rather than just the money being dumped in. I'd like to hear how we're going to do it. I want to hear some thoughts on the curriculum too, as it relates to your outcomes 1.1 and 1.3. I'm grateful to be here for 10 years, but I'm surprised that we've been talking about new curriculum for 10 years. All three governments, first the PCs, then the NDP, and now the UCP, and we don't ever seem to get there. Personally, I'm surprised at the disengagement and the, I don't know if conflict's the right word, with teachers and providers. I mean, whenever I want to do something in business or my family, it's best to get the people that are going to be delivering it on side. And you know, teachers and educators come to my office and talk about how the curriculum has not been properly fleshed out in terms of when the information is presented to the right ages and that kind of thing. So I would just like I mean, I know our time is precious, but a 30-second or a minute statement on how we're going to engage our key frontline workers in this. I want to go to the throne speech and a promise that was made just a week ago. I'm just going to quote it. It'll just take a second. Parents know what is best for their kids, and Albertans have long supported pluralism as a key principle in our education system. That is why the government will bring forward a package of regulatory improvements to help create new charter schools and better support existing charters to realize the promise of choice in education. Choice is a way to have parents more involved. Choice is a way to potentially correct these problems that I've talked about and know about. But I want to talk a little bit about homeschooling. This government talks about homeschooling and their support for it. My three boys went through the public system with great success, and I know a lot of homeschoolers have had great success. But when I talk to them, what I'm being told is the average homeschooler gets $800 for parent-directed traditional education and up to $1,600 annually if they fully integrate into the boards. So what are we doing to help fund these homeschoolers, these homeschool families, when most of the funding goes to the board? This is I think my fourth estimate. I've asked every other department about what their effects of inflation are going to be, but I think the Canadian government puts out that inflation for families is 5.5% annually, and everybody I talk to thinks it's over 10. So my goodness, the ability for parents to really focus on their children is going to be seriously challenged. So I think it's time to increase support there. Support for special needs. I was glad to hear in the throne speech that there was going to be some more support for that. But it's a consistent problem almost every month in my constituency office, where parents who have challenges with their children feel that money isn't allocated or put properly across the school boards and the schools for special needs students and the outcomes of that. And I wonder, instead of money, I wonder if we're measuring this, if we have some things we'd like to help the school boards with. I want to talk a little bit about pensions. On page 33, your expenses, your pension provisions, it's the very last expense item. You have a $118 million credit in 2020-21, $95 million forecast for this year, and then it falls off. Treasury Board and Finance's expense column shows that we're still paying $500 million a year for the pre-1992 teachers' pension, and I asked the minister for how much longer that would continue, and unfortunately I don't think he had an answer that night. So if you'd have an answer for how much more the Alberta taxpayer owes on that, I'd appreciate the answer. Also under ministry, in your revenue side, you have 125 million in premium. Oh, I'm sorry, it's for estimate, it's 173 million in premiums, fees, and licenses. I'd like to know school fees and where those are at, and if that contains anything else other than school fees. You also have 179 million in other revenue. What is that 179 million? Transportation's in there, and I know funding rural transportation is a huge concern, and it's very, very challenging with the carbon tax, the cost of gas, the challenges in rural Alberta. But I'd like to know a little bit about how that's going and the contracts that have been put in place. I'd like to know about that. And reserves. I'm concerned about reserves too. 464 million is about 7% of what gets the 6.5 billion that gets paid in instructions. But we've been talking about this for several years. What's your plan to do something about it? I'd like to hear a plan. I'd like to hear a plan that allows school boards to protect against the vagaries of financial life. But I'd also like to see as much money as possible in Alberta families and Alberta communities. Okay. I would also then back to the testing. There's a business principle that you can't manage something unless you measure it. And again, I'm concerned about when I consistently hear that our school system has slipped from what was top drawer. If I'm wrong, please, I'd love to hear that. But I'd like to, and I'd like to hear a plan of how we're going to actually measure how well our kids and our families are doing. And thank you again very, very much for your time.
Thank you, Honourable Member, and to the Minister for response.
Thank you. You covered a lot of ground, so I'll try to cover a lot of ground in return. Thank you. When you were talking about assessments, let's start there. Yes, assessments are very important. We know that assessments, what is measured gets addressed, and so therefore we are looking to continually improve on our assessments. We had the College of Alberta School Superintendents do a review of what currently is being utilized in the system, particularly in our early years, so that we have a good handle of, because every school authority has the ability to tap into whatever assessments they would like to use. Of course, there are provincial assessments that we use, whether they're the PATs, the SLSs, or which is the specialized learning supports, or is it a specialized? No, I've got SLS stuck in my brain. The SLS learning assessment. And then we also have the diploma exams. So we have numerous assessments throughout all of the education system. As we all know, diploma exams, in difference to the COVID pandemic, we had to look at what was doable, particularly through the various phases, the waves that we had. So in the fall, we went to ensure that students have the ability to. Right now, we're at a weighting of 10%. For the spring diplomas that were just done recently. So anyways, all to say we have numerous assessments happening across the system, but what does that tell us? Does that tell us that our education system is any better? As you'd indicated, depending on which assessment tools you're looking at, whether it's the PISA scores or the TIMS, we have seen declines in certain areas or stagnation in others. We are, throughout the curriculum development, we are looking to address those areas. So in curriculum, particularly K-6, we've had a focus on literacy and numeracy. That's been very important. That is why we had assessments done in the spring on literacy and numeracy, and further to that, we added the $45 million, because what research was telling us, and we were one of the first jurisdictions to look at this across Canada, research was telling us that if we focused on particularly those early grades, that we would have better success in ensuring that they caught up and were able to continue on with their educational journey. That's why we did add that $45 million to address those particular targeted areas in grades 2 and 3, and grade 1 is now starting, as I had indicated earlier. The new curriculum is, and you were right to say it's been decades in the coming. I was a trustee for 11 and a half years before I got into the role that I'm in now. And throughout that whole time period, we were talking about new curriculum, and there were various ministers of education who had different ideas about bringing it forward, and there'd been work that had been done. We had spent to date $64 million, and nothing had actually finished and crossed the finish line. I felt very strongly that we need to get it over the finish line. We actually need to have new curriculum in front of our students to address the very things that you were talking about, the declines or the stagnation in certain subject areas. So we have worked diligently. It has been a very transparent process. You can go online, you can see all of the things that we've done, from the new guiding framework to the ministerial order on student learning to, tens of thousands of people being involved in surveys, to putting out draft curriculum, to having engagement sessions, to having education partners be involved, to curriculum working groups, which are current teachers, to my department, who has seconded teachers that come out of the classroom to work in our department so that they can work on curriculum, and they're in those targeted grades. There are so many people, tens of thousands of hours being worked on curriculum renewal so that we can address the very things that we need to address, making sure that we have a robust curriculum that actually focuses on skills and knowledge, but ensures that we are setting our students up for the realities of today's world, because it is a modern world and they need to be able to fit into it. You were right to say in the throne speech that choice in education is a hallmark of our government. It has been. It was something that we ran on as a government, and we are so blessed and fortunate in Alberta to have so many different opportunities for students. They can attend a public school, they can attend a Catholic school, they can attend a Francophone school, they can attend a charter school, they can attend an independent school, and they can homeschool. The public charter schools are actual public schools that have been in existence for quite some time. They are research focused. They are to be, they were initially conceived to be incubators for new methodologies of teaching, new research-based pedagogy, new ways of doing things. They are very much focused on being aligned with post-secondary, with research. And in fact, we want to bring that knowledge and those learnings and those successes back into the regular public system. And again, they are, and since 2008, I'm just going back in memory here, I believe since 2008, there has not been a new public charter school. In fact, we had a cap previous to the Education Act and to the Choice in Education Act. There was a cap of 15 schools. We sat at 13 schools since up to 2008, or since 2008, sorry. 2008 was the last new one, previous to our removing the cap. we are now at 15 charter schools. Well, what does that mean? That's an additional 500 students that are attending a charter school. That is focused on a particular philosophy, whether it's vocational or whether it's STEM or whether it's one of the many other, there's the Music Academy, there's the land-based Indigenous school, charter school. So there's many opportunities in those areas. Again, this charter schools represent 1.5% of the population, but only receive 1.2% of the funding. So there is opportunities as well to address special needs. I know you talked about inflation. I know I mentioned inflation earlier when I had my chart that showed that inflation, that we have been funding well above inflation costs and enrollment growth for many, many years, decades in fact, but we are continuing to address what is most needed within our schools. Sorry, I'm not sure I'm going to be able to get through all your questions, but I'll do my absolute best here. We are certainly addressing transportation. As I said earlier, transportation costs, we have 300,000 students on a mode of transportation every single day in this province, and it's well over, I believe it's over 10 million kilometers a year traveled. When we look at the fact that we have added 4.6% increase this year to address some of those rising costs. This is on top of 5% last year and on top of 5% the year before. So the very reason that I started the Student Transportation Task Force was to look at, are there efficiencies that we can find within the education system to address issues that every single school authority is facing in transportation? When you look at the fact that right now we have approximately about 43 out of the 70 school authorities that are sharing transportation. Well, yes, that is great. But is there more that we can do? Can we have procurement of bulk fuel? Can we have procurement of school buses to gain further efficiencies? Those are all the things that the task force was looking at. They came forward with recommendations. We also did an audit of a number of school authorities to determine what the actual expenses are and where we can find improvements. We are very committed in the 23-24 year to bring forward and act on some of these recommendations. I'm also working with the Minister of Transportation, Minister Sani, because many of some of the recommendations actually are within her purview. So, one of the things that we heard from school authorities was that our buses cannot go over a certain speed, which is not the posted highway speed.
Thank you, Minister. That concludes the first portion of questions for independent members. We'll now move over to Government Caucus for 20 minutes of questions from the members. Would you like to combine your time with Minister? Amory?
My preference would be to keep it the way it's been going. If that's okay with the Minister, is that your preference?
I would prefer to do block timing as well. I don't think my voice could take it otherwise.
Right.
Sorry, thanks.
Proceed, member.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and good morning to you, Minister LaGrange, and good morning to your team as well. I want to take this opportunity on behalf of my colleagues on the government side to thank you for being here today and answering the questions that all members have for you. I found it particularly relevant in your answer to MLA Barnes with respect to independent charter schools and generally the choice that this province provides to parents who have children in the education system. Be as it may, I think it's important for parents to have the choice to decide what type of education their children receive. We have a lot of questions for you this morning, and certainly I think my colleagues are all eager to get in on this, so I'm not going to take a bunch of time with preamble except to say to you that I want to talk a little bit about what you were talking about earlier and segue right back into that parental choice topic. I want to point you to key objective 4.2 under outcome 4. And specifically Alberta's K-12 education system is well governed and managed. of your business plan, and it is stated there that it's stated there to be that support choice with a variety of schooling options for students and parents within the education system. One of the things that I have been advocating for a long time, and I think you're well aware of that, is standing by the choice that parents are always in the best decision to make decisions with respect to how their children should be educated. And I think that sentiment is echoed by all of the members on this side of the House. Now, having said that, Minister, I want you to please go into a little more detail about how Budget 22 specifically supports parents' choice in education. I know you touched on that earlier in your responses, but I'd like for you to discuss a little bit more about that. I also want to know what has been built into the capital plan to support this objective as well. I want to refer you as well to key objective number 4.2 and expanding to 4.4, which both seem to continue to discuss school choice. And those two key objectives are related to increased schooling options for students and parents, and more specifically, key objective 4.4 references changes to financial and governance practices for private schools, which we know in Alberta are more commonly referred to as independent schools. Can you explain to this committee why this is a priority for you and speak to a little bit about what changes that your department is contemplating with respect to governance and financial practices for private schools? In addition, Minister, we hear from many members, often from the opposition, if you will, that funding is being taken away from public schools in order to increase funding for private schools and charter schools. I want to give you the opportunity to answer a few questions and elaborate more about this as well. First, Minister, can you confirm if charter schools are in fact publicly funded by the government, or if they receive their funding independently through their tuition, through parental contributions, or whatever that may be? I think you said earlier today that a very small percentage was funded publicly, but I'd like for you to elaborate on that if you could. I'm also wondering if you can discuss how much of this actual funding goes to charter schools from the government. And finally, Minister, I'd like to see if you can discuss for us or address the topic of wait lists with respect to charter schools. As you may recall, I spoke to you in your office about one of the charter schools that is operating in Calgary, and the issue of wait lists is a real problem with respect to that particular school, and I would venture to say for most of them as well. I'm wondering if you can discuss to this for us here today what the plan is for charter schools and addressing their wait lists. Can you tell us how many students are currently attending charter schools, how long their wait lists are, to the extent that you can comment on that, and how you're planning to address this as well? I assume that the earmarks in funding in the capital plan might help address these issues, but I'm wondering if you can discuss whether or not there is a plan to expand the cap, or the number of charter schools, I should say, going forward in the future. I think with that said, I'm going to yield my time to another of my colleagues to continue asking questions for this block. Thank you.
Thank you, colleague. Thank you, Minister, for taking the time here with us today, and for all that you've done for our children throughout the pandemic, and your leadership. I just wanted to dive in talking about COVID a little bit, and talking about the impacts on our kids and what we're going to do to help our kids pull through this. As you know, I'm a father of 4 school-age children, and have seen the impact the pandemic has had on them in different ways for each one of them. And I know for my son, his mental health was a concern throughout all of this, as he was isolated from his friends, from sport, and other things throughout the pandemic. Actually, my oldest daughter thrived. She did really well with the at-home learning and online learning, but it's more so my twins that are now in grade 5. There was concern. I've heard similar concerns from parents in my constituency. They were in grade 3 when this happened, which is a pivotal year for them, and I've just seen that loss of time in grade 3 kind of linger into grade 4 and into grade 5. And so my questions are kind of going down the path about how do we help our kids who have fallen behind throughout the pandemic in regards to helping them get caught up and address some of the educational concerns and that we've seen throughout all that, as well as some of the mental health challenges that we've seen on that. So just going to page 129 of the fiscal plan, it highlights that budget 2022 is putting $30 million of targeted funding to support students experiencing academic challenges and create school environments supporting students' well-being and mental health, with $110 million being allocated over a 3-year period. That's great news. So just wondering, Minister, if you can please highlight which budget line this $30 million is allocated under, and how this funding will be used to support students and teachers across the province. Then I'd like to know how much discretion school boards are going to have in regards to the allocation and use of this funding. Obviously, different districts are going to see different challenges. And then what is the ministry doing under this budget to ensure that students who are being homeschooled also have access to these important services, as these students have also been impacted throughout the pandemic? Sorry, just checking time. In addition to the reference in the fiscal plan under outcome 4 of the ministry's business plan, which can be found on page 32, key objective 4.1, speaks to students' well-being and positive mental health. As I've already mentioned and I've experienced with my own children, we know that the pandemic has had some serious implications for our students' mental wellness, and that evidence also shows that students have experienced academic learning loss, especially in early years. I know I've asked this a bit, but do want to, I guess, reinforce, hoping you can get into more detail on supports for students experiencing academic challenges or who may require additional mental wellness supports throughout all of this. And I believe you had mentioned that more details are going to be coming in the spring, so hopefully we can get a little bit of a sneak peek here today. And in addition to mental well-being of students and teachers, there are certainly been concerns around physical safeties in school. Every time schools were reopened, it was up to education to ensure that students could return to the class safely. I'm glad they were able to do that and the work that was done. It was then up to schools to implement the guidelines and safety protocols. So page 129 of the physical plan states that the budget 2022-2023 has $13 million to be put towards ventilation improvements projects for schools' safe indoor air initiative. So wondering if the minister, if you can explain for the committee the importance of this project and how this will improve the safety of our students and our teachers. And then I don't see this initiative actually delineated under the capital plan. So wondering if, Minister, you can clarify under what line item that allocated funding is coming from for this initiative. Thank you, Minister.
Honourable Member, I see that Mr. Godfrey has now left us, and we've had Mr. Steffen join us. Mr. Steffen, would you like to introduce yourself, please, to everyone?
My pleasure. Jason Steffen, MLA for Red Deer South.
Thank you so much. And now we'll turn it over to the Minister.
Well, thank you so much. Great questions, and looking forward to answering all of those. And yes, indeed, you know, to start with parental choice, that is certainly something that is very near and dear to all our hearts, because we see the success of choice in Alberta. The fact that parents have the ability and actually have the right as the first educators of their children, as the primary caregivers and first educators of their children, to choose the type of education that they want for their children. And we have a very long, proud history of supporting school choice that we are going to continue with. And part of that is ensuring that that we do indeed fund all the choices that are available. Everyone is the taxpayer. Everyone ensures that they support education throughout this province, and so respecting the choices that are made is very paramount. So in Budget 22, we have speaking to your question about capital plan to support this objective, we've provided $25 million over 3 years to support collegiate programs and charter school expansions in the education system. So this would cover costs associated with facility leases or expansions like rental or third-party spaces. And also we have provided in this budget $47 million over 3 years to support school infrastructure for charter schools and collegiate schools to provide new and improved student spaces across the province for acquiring furniture and equipment or leasehold improvements. So really when we look at ensuring that there's equity across the system, this of course was something, you were right to say that you know, charter schools, public charter schools have had long waiting lists. In fact, in 21-22, there were 15 charter schools in the province serving 10,519 students. And they represent 1.5% of the student population, but they only receive 1.2% of overall funding. When you look at the wait lists, charter school growth has been largely constrained historically due to the legislation, where there were limitations on the number of charter schools, enrollment caps, and the lack of facility space. In fact, I heard many parents who wanted to put their children in charter schools would put their children at birth, once those children were born, onto the waiting list. The Education Act lifted the cap on the number of charter schools, and the Choice in Education Act removed enrollment caps. So existing charter schools have wait lists in excess of 5,500 students, and much needed space is needed to address this capacity. So many charter schools have long wait lists, but simply cannot expand because of a lack of space. So we are providing that short-term support of $25 million over 3 years. For lease space, but also we must examine more permanent solutions, and part of that examination will lead us to spending $47 million over 3 years. Again, it's over 3 years in capital investments to support collegiate programs and charter school expansions in the education system. So this includes new schools and a charter campus concept. And the whole collegiate idea actually started in one of our between two of our public schools, and the NAIT Collegiate started with Edmonton Public and Edmonton Catholic, looking at an opportunity to build a collegiate, which in fact is another pathway for students to get involved in vocational schools and STEM programming with a more focus. And that, for whatever reason, that did not transpire under the previous government. It wasn't, and I think the government even before that, there'd been a lot of time invested in that, and there were numerous reasons, but it did not actually materialize. And so when we were developing our platform, that was a platform commitment that we made, that we would revitalize that collegiate concept, because we know that in Alberta, we are going to be short approximately 30,000 tradespeople in the next decade. And so we need to do whatever we can to encourage our young people to enter into those fields, and providing a collegiate program is just one of those avenues. I'm also happy to say we provided capital funding to ACME for Golden Hills School Division, because they have a very unique concept where they partner with businesses and with their local community to ensure that they are, in fact, giving students a heads up. And they've got a really neat concept I'd love to explain in more depth. One of the other questions was, can you explain why this priority and speak a little bit about the changes? So the education system has a number of delivery methods, including public and separate, charter, independent, francophone, and home education. As I said, in 2019, Alberta's government engaged with more than 50,000 Albertans to share their views on educational choice through an online survey. So the results concluded that 62% of respondents were satisfied with the amount of choice that Alberta has. So the Government of Alberta did follow through with our platform commitment by passing the Choice in Education Act, which I was very proud to be the minister to move that forward. We also committed to offering educational choice that includes independent schools and home education alongside a strong public education system, so that parents can select the path that they feel best will help their child reach its full potential. Some of the changes we're looking to make as we move forward is reducing red tape. Red tape is something that bureaucracies tend to get bogged down, and I know many of you know this. And so education, we're looking to streamline. I'm happy to say that we've already met 25% of the 25% goal, which is above our goal for this current year in reducing red tape. We certainly want to ensure that we do have good oversight. We want those dollars accounted for and that they're going to good use. But we also want to eliminate that red tape as much as possible. So we are, and I guess one other thing I could, because I've heard a lot of misinformation about charter schools. And I do have a document, it's the 2020 Education Survey Highlights that I'm happy to share with everyone, that really shows income by type of school, and it really shows that all education supports all types of income, social economic status individuals in their schools. And it's very, very little deviation from whether it's a public school, a Catholic school, a Francophone school, a charter school, a private independent school, or a home education, that they all roughly serve the same social economic diversity within their schools. So going to the other question that was asked, and I'm sorry, I do like to chat, so and COVID is going to be a big area, and particularly learning disruptions and mental health. With over $1 billion of accessibility by our school authorities, we continued to provide ongoing supports. You know, we were in constant communication with our school authorities, with our education partners, and you know, we have seen a lot of highs and lows throughout the pandemic, but we have been able to navigate it, and I would say navigate it quite successfully, given that our students were able to remain in the classroom, learning in person as much as possible, and probably more than any other jurisdiction in all of Canada. But it took a lot of effort, as you rightly noted, MLA Nixon, that there was a lot of effort from everyone right across the system. So a huge shout out to our teachers and our administrators who were constantly making sure that the students were safe, that their staff were safe, that we were following all of the guidelines that we were receiving from the Chief Medical Officer of Health and her team, that were, you know, always accessible to us to make sure that the supports were there. You asked to highlight which line the $30 million for learning loss disruption is on. And to address mental health and wellness. It's on page 73 of Education's estimates under the program 3.2 Learning Support Funding allocation of $1.4 billion, which is targeted support funding for student well-being and mental health. So overall, we have $1.4 billion, but this $30 million is in addition to that $1.4 billion. So this sits outside of that $1.4 billion. We are going to take those dollars, that $110 million over 3 years, we're going to leverage that. We're actually talking to other ministries, the Minister of Health and the Minister of Children's Services, and any other ministry that is even marginally involved in helping us address some of the concerns that we are seeing. As you may or may not know, I am a rehab practitioner by profession. I have worked with a developmentally disabled all my life. I had a younger brother born with Down syndrome that led me into the profession, and so I am a huge proponent of early intervention. And when the early intervention research that we're seeing, when the research...
Thank you, Minister. That concludes the government member's first block of questions, and we'll proceed to our 5-minute coffee break. Enjoy, everyone. question followed by 5 minutes of response from the minister. As mentioned, members are asked to advise the chair at the beginning of their rotation if they wish to combine their time with the minister's time. And please remember that discussion should flow through the chair at all times, regardless of whether or not speaking time is combined. Please proceed.
Thank you, Madam Chair. 5 minutes. Oh my goodness, I forgot it was 5 minutes. Okay. So yeah, just thanks. I want to just give a thanks to all the folks involved in the budget documents as well, and of course the education staff who I know are working hard, and of course everybody across the province, all the teachers and education staff in schools too. You know, I just wanted to note. And it will tie to the business plan, I assure you. But you know, just reflecting as well on Ukraine, and you know, obviously, as you said, our hearts are with folks. And I was thinking, you know, me, minister, my background in curriculum, I was thinking about our world-renowned current social studies curriculum, and in grade 3, students currently consider. India, Tunisia, Peru, and Ukraine. And I note in your drafts, and again, I'm only privy to the drafts that I see online, so things may have shifted, you have removed any references to Ukraine. So, friendly suggestion, you may want to consider the explicit naming of Ukraine in future social studies drafts, given the impact of this community on the development of Alberta and the historic and ongoing contributions of the community. So let's talk a little bit about curriculum specifically, and obviously tie this into 1.1, page 31 of the business plan, implementing new K-6 curriculum, as well as I'll tie it into outcome 3.1 in the business plan, which is the supports and professional learning and so forth needed for implementation. So you did note in your opening remarks some funding related to implementation. I was typing furiously, but I would like some clarification on the numbers. How much specifically is allocated to implementation. I believe you noted $59 million in year 1. I'd love you to flesh that out a little bit. As I noted, you know that I had the opportunity to work on curriculum and did a deep dive into research on development and implementation. And we know that the evidence is clear that first effective implementation, it's a costly endeavor, and it requires a number of you know, essential conditions to be addressed by all stakeholders in order to be effective. So things like a shared vision, leadership, research, resources, teacher professional development, time, community engagement, to name a few. And so to that end, have you dedicated resources to research capacity within the ministry to track success of implementation? And so do you have a framework in place for how success will be measured? I don't see any indicators in your business plan, so I think that is a fair question. Now on resources, similarly, I don't know if you have specific dollars allocated to resources. You may have mentioned it in your opening comments, but I don't see a line item. So, you know, when we're talking about resources, we're talking about beyond textbook, but beyond textbooks, but online learning supports and so on. So just wondering how specifically that's going to be managed, and what funding will specifically be allocated on resources. Professional development is, of course, absolutely essential as well. Teachers need to have PD opportunities. And we know, Minister, that this is an entirely new process for teachers. Historically, curricula were developed subject by subject, implemented subject by subject, not multiple courses at once. And so this will be a whole heck of a lot for teachers, particularly those K-6 teachers who are often teaching multiple subjects, and, you know, are also, let us remind everybody, teaching right now in the midst of a global pandemic. So they've got a lot going on. So what supports specifically for PD will be in place? Will the ATA be involved in these conversations? Will they be provided perhaps an increase in their grants to support PD funds? Piloting, I want to ask about piloting as well. We know that fewer than 1% of teachers are involved in piloting. I think about 2% of students. This can't possibly be a large enough sample size. And more worrisome than that, I think, is a concern around it not being representative of the broader Alberta population. So I wonder, do you have demographic information on students who are involved in piloting, Indigenous, Francophone, varied socioeconomic backgrounds? And for those who might say, oh, that's not relevant, it certainly is relevant. It does matter, because we all know, or maybe we will know now, that kids do need to see themselves in curriculum. And so really, really important that we have a diverse representative sample when it comes to piloting. And what will be the indicators of success for that curriculum pilot? Will those indicators be publicly shared? If the pilot is not successful, what will be the next steps?
Thank you so much, Honourable Member. We'll turn it over to the Minister for response, please.
Well, thank you so much, and yes, agree with you that our hearts and minds are with the people of the Ukraine, all of those that are in the Ukraine, as well as those who are in other countries, many of whom are, I believe we have over 300,000 of Ukrainian descent right here in Alberta. So we do appreciate all of that they have done for this province. And how supportive they are of education, because as you say, education is, or as we all say, education is a way to ensure that our young people will have the knowledge and the skills necessary to move forward, and hopefully they will do a better job than we have done to ensure that countries remain democratic. But we will continue to fight that good fight as we move forward. In terms of social studies, I'm happy to say that we did announce prior to Christmas that we would be relooking at the social studies blueprint, which is the scope and sequence. So we are listening. We said all along that we're going to listen to Albertans, that we're going to listen to teachers, we're going to listen to administrators, we're going to listen to school boards, we're going to listen to all of our education partners that wanted to be part of the process. We have had tens of thousands of everyday Albertans look at the draft curriculum and provide their feedback. I provided over $1 million in school support to education partners so that they could do the deep dive and give us that really rich feedback that we needed to make refinements. And I'm happy to report that that is moving forward, and it's been very, very, very successful. I said from the very beginning that we would be open and transparent. There is a website with all of the information on it to keep everyone up to date as we move forward. And we wanted to hear all the good, the bad, and the ugly. And we have heard it all, and we are taking it into account and working with the feedback that we're getting to make. Because at the end of the day, the only goal that I gave to my department in curriculum was to end up with the absolute best curriculum possible in front of our students. And they have taken that to heart, and they've been working really, really hard on that. In terms of curriculum implementation, yes, to be successful, we have to have a strong, robust way of implementing it, which requires dollars, and that's why I'm very proud to say that we have, done the math that we feel we will need to implement successfully, and that's $191 million over 3 years. $59 million in the first year. And I just want to remind everybody that this current year that we are in, we had allocated $6 million because we knew that we were just starting the piloting and we wouldn't be into full-fledged implementation. But that $59 million will cover supports, professional development for teachers, resources. It is targeted, it's outside. I didn't want any school authority having to utilize their dollars that they use in instruction for implementation. That's why we added all these additional dollars up and above. So very soon, once, and maybe I'll back up just slightly to say that we have the curriculum implementation advisory group right now that has been meeting that is going to advise us on how we are going to actually move forward on implementing the math, the English language arts, and the phys ed. And when we have that specified and nailed down, then we can better determine how we're going to allocate those $59 million. So that is to come, and I hope to share that information very shortly. Part of being in today's world is that we have to have things in digital format and shared accessibility amongst all teachers. And so we do have the new Learn Alberta website, and we developed a resource unit. And I'll turn it over to my Deputy Minister, Andre, to share with us what that looks like and what the website looks like.
Sure, thanks, Minister. And Emily Irwin's question on teacher resources is a critical one, and thanks for conveying that. We actually established a special group that are largely comprised actually of frontline teachers within the department under an executive director with a sole focus of ensuring.
Thank you so much, member. And now we will go to the independent side.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. So just 5 minutes a block again, I presume, Minister. Okay, thank you. I mentioned in my last block that, you know, over 10 years of working on the curriculum, and here we are at a point in time where I believe you've lost the key involvement and engagement of our key providers, the teachers. Many of them have come to my office in the last little while with another issue with the very, very same concerns, and that's Alberta teachers' discipline. They're concerned with the government's wanting to get involved in that. They're concerned that it may do a couple of things. It may make the teachers' union, instead of a promoter of making sure teachers' discipline is in order, it may actually refocus them as a protector of the teacher facing the issue, and they're also worried about the cost. I understand now it's a cost that the teachers themselves pay the burden of. Where's that extra money going to come from at a time our taxpayer is already stretched to the max? So I guess I would just want to hear something from you or caution you that, you know, it's important to bring the stakeholders along at every step, and I wonder your thoughts on that. And then for the rest of my time, I kind of want to rehash some of the things I mentioned earlier. I had mentioned that I had been hearing that the Canadian school system has slipped to 28th in the world, and Alberta slipped within Canada. Where do you think we're at? And what are the real measurements going to be? So when we're here a year from now, when those that are here 3 years from now, how are we going to know that we're improving? How are we going to know that we're helping give our children the future that we can and the future that they deserve? What are those measurements going to be? I like when you said in your remarks, success of choice. Choice in education has been successful, and yes, Alberta has led the way. And I know you're not the finance minister, but I would sure like to hear you say you will advocate for more money, even from the existing budget, for homeschooling, more money for choice. Again, you know, if it's accurate that we've slipped, you know, then changes have to be made, and you know, I think it's more important to measure and look for value for money than it is just to put more money into it. But money is important, and especially when we're spending $9 billion in education annually, I think there's a lot we can do to better focus those resources. So thank you for that. I asked you last time, and I know time was limited. We have 125 million. Oh, I'm sorry, it's 138 million in revenue from premiums, fees, and licenses. How much of this is school fees paid by parents? What is the balance? And in other revenue, the 2021-2022 forecast, we have 125 million. So please, if you could take a little bit of time and tell me what parents are paying to have their children in mainstream public school, and what the rest of those revenues are, I would greatly appreciate it. And if you have some insights on it, I know that a lot of parents pay extra to have their kids in the extra school curriculum activities as well that probably don't show up on here. And you know, at this time, just a special shout out to so many of those teachers that work extra hours to make those clubs and athletics happen for our children. It's greatly appreciated by all of us, I'm sure. I asked last time about the reserves. $464 million in reserves. Okay, but again, payroll is over, it's $6.5 billion, I believe. I believe that instruction, ECS to grade 12 is payroll expenses. What is a fair reserve? What, you say you want less, but what is your target? What should they have for the vagaries of financial life and the ups and downs? And keeping in mind that there is only one taxpayer, and inflation and utilities and insurance and all those other costs that our families are facing, it would be so nice. I also know that the property tax educational assessment, the province's share has been increased by 1.5%. I'd like to hear a little bit about the hardship that may add to municipalities. I mean, 1.5% is a small number, but across Alberta properties, it's probably in the hundreds of millions, and that will have some effects on municipalities and their ability to provide services for sure. Okay, so if you could do your best to answer those, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Honourable Member. Now we'll go over to the Minister for her response.
Thank you so much, and I will do my best to answer. Long list, but I will do my best. So on the teacher discipline, I brought forward the Students First Act, which was Bill 85 last fall, to address some of the issues that we were seeing. Alberta is an outlier compared to every other province in Canada, as well as when you look at any other profession out there in terms of having the union oversee teacher discipline. Again, this is something that we wanted to address. There had been concerns expressed by numerous ministers of education previous to myself, and certainly it was one of the things that I saw firsthand when cases were coming across my desk early on as Minister of Education that actually just broke my heart. As a mother of 7 children, a grandmother of 7, as someone who's invested a lot of my life, over 11 and a half years as school board trustee, to see the cases that were coming across my desk needed our attention. And so when we're such an outlier, we need to fix things. And so in the Bill 85 Students First Act, which was the first step, and I was very clear that that would be our first step in addressing the issues with teacher discipline, we are now going to have an online registry where all teachers will be registered. It will be a public-facing website location that anyone can go to and look at the certification status of a teacher that is registered within our province. And it can be a teacher that is under the Alberta Teachers Association, which is the vast majority, or it can be a teacher that's in an independent school or a charter school that don't have affiliation with the Alberta Teachers Association. So all teachers will be registered, and if there is a cancellation of a certificate or suspension of a certificate due to professional incompetence or unprofessional conduct, then that will be recorded there. We will also have an expedited process that if someone is criminally charged for a crime that abuses children and affects the safety of children within our school system and the general public, that there would be an expedited process, that there does not have to be a hearing. So that will also be taking place. There's a streamlining of the process of the committee structure, as well as making sure that every teacher has a criminal and vulnerable sector check when they're hired and every 5 years after that. In the upcoming, there have been some very public cases which has highlighted that we need to move further faster. And so I will be bringing forward legislation which will take the next step. And the next step is to actually remove the Alberta Teachers Association from oversight of the teacher discipline process. I've actually had teachers come up to me, administrators come up to me and say, this is long overdue. please bring us into line with other professions. I had one just the other day, a teacher who came up and felt that the process had totally failed her as a teacher and is happy to speak out on this particular matter. So are we going to move forward on this? Yes, absolutely, and I look forward to bringing legislation forward this spring. We have been engaging with all the education partners, including the Alberta Teachers Association, on feedback and consultation on what this could look like. So I'm looking forward to bringing that forward. On the curriculum and on education in general and our scores, et cetera, I agree with you. I was trustee for 11 and a half years, and we were always looking to bring forward a new curriculum. Unfortunately, that hasn't happened prior to our government taking office, but I'm very committed to ensuring that we are going to actually implement in September 2022 the 3 subject areas of English language arts and mathematics and phys ed and wellness, what that looks like. I have the curriculum advisory group advising me on how we're going to transition that in, but I'm really looking forward to bringing that forward. On homeschooling, yes, we do provide supports to homeschools. And in fact, we are in regular consultation with homeschool communities, their associations and their membership, looking for what they want. The vast majority are not actually looking for additional dollars. One of the key areas that they felt they needed was special needs supports for the students that they have with special needs. And so we're actually looking to address that gap as we speak. And so there is dollars allocated in my budget to address that gap.
Thank you so much, Minister. And now we'll turn over to the government members. Please proceed, Mr. Nixon.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you again, Minister. Last time we had the chance to talk, I asked some questions about learning loss and students' mental wellness. Shared anecdotally kind of my own experience with my kids. I've certainly heard from many parents and educators within my constituency concerns. Of course, with my kids, they come from a very healthy home and have 2 parents that were there. We've done a lot of extra work with our kids to help them overcome that. And so just wanted to give you a chance. Unfortunately, MLA Amory and I threw a lot of questions at you last time, so wanted to give you a chance as well to address what we're doing around students' mental wellness and learning loss that we saw throughout the pandemic. What do we know about that beyond kind of anecdotally, and what are we doing specifically to address that? So how's this funding going to be used to help support students and teachers throughout the province? How much discretion will school boards have around this? And so then I wanted to dive into another topic that I hit on, but unfortunately we didn't have time to address. And that had to do with safety in schools, physical safety within schools, and something I heard a lot about throughout the pandemic as well from parents. On page 129 of the fiscal plan, it states that budget 2022-23 allocated $13 million towards ventilation improvements. So I wonder if you could talk about that. I believe this is for the School Safe Indoor Air Initiative. Specifically, wondering if you can explain for the committee the importance of this project and how this will improve safety for students and teachers. And then continuing on with the School Safe Indoor Air Initiative. Now, I will say this is my understanding that for funding for this initiative actually comes from a transfer from the federal government, and perhaps that's why it's not signaled out as a line item here. So wondering if you can speak to the guidelines currently in place for HVAC and HEPA in schools. I'm also wondering, do schools receive funding to maintain these systems normally, or is this the only funding that they will have available for them to be able to upgrade the air quality if needed? And then lastly, I'm also wondering if throughout the pandemic, the government has invested any other money in this type of initiative. And with that, I will pass it over to MLA Hunter.
Well, first of all, Minister, I wanted to thank you and your team for helping the government to get to balance. That is something that I've tried to thank each of the ministries. I know that this was a cross-government approach and strategy to be able to help get us to a balanced budget. And I know that there's been lots of pressures on education to be able to obviously, there's never enough money to be able to get the job done, but you've done a phenomenal job, and I want to recognize you for the work that you've done and your team has done to be able to hold the line and to make sure that we are providing good quality education at fair prices to our to Alberta taxpayers. And so thank you so much for that. I also wanted to thank you for the work you guys have done in terms of the red tape reduction. I've talked to many teachers and administrators that feel it is, you know, their time would be better spent in the classroom, working with kids, helping them rather than filling out multiple forms. And so the work that you've done in being able to decrease that that paper trail that they have to follow. And then you said this earlier, it's very important to make sure that you have accountability, and I think that's really what good governance is. But certainly the work that you've done in making sure that the work that the paperwork that they have to fill out is as minimal as possible. So thank you for that. I don't really have time to go into my questions about some of the school capital plans, but we can maybe do that in the next sector or the next session. So thank you so much for your work and look forward to your answers.
Pardon me. Thank you so much, Honourable Member. And with that, we will turn the time over to Minister for response.
Thank you so much. So yes, going back to the well-being of our students, particularly through COVID, and yes, we did allow school authorities access to over $1 billion of supports and resources, but we know that that at the end of the day, it's about students and teachers, and how are they doing, how are they coping, and so it was very important for us to ensure that as we move forward, that those supports and resources are there available for them to access. Part of the overall findings of the Child and Youth Wellbeing Review, and I'm not sure if all of you are aware that there was a Child and Youth Wellbeing panel that went right across the province, really delving into mental health and wellness of our young people, the effects of COVID on them, and just they interacted with school authorities and parents and community groups to find that on the ground understanding of what really has been transpiring. And so what we have found is that there have been impacts, and in some areas significant impacts, as you indicated for your child. I see it even within my own family members, etc. So how do we address this? Well, yes, we have a well-funded support system. We have a well-funded education system at $8.4 billion. Yes, we're going to increase by $700 million, but we also have to provide some targeted supports. So as I indicated earlier, we have the $45 million in targeted supports for early learning loss disruption that we have targeted for grades 1, 2, and 3. We did add the e-learning hub, but what more can we do? And so the $110 million over 3 years that I've allocated, $30 million of that in the current year is what we're going to look at leveraging with other ministries. As I said earlier, Ministry of Health, Ministry of Children's Services, Ministry of, pardon me, working with the Associate Minister of Mental Health and Addictions, making sure that those dollars are used to fill the gaps, because we do know that there's a lot of supports out there. Sometimes it's just even a matter of linking people to those supports, but we also know that there are gaps, and so ensuring that we fill those gaps. What we found in the review was that the average time loss while transition to online learning was about 3.5 months for most children, pardon me, and 6.5 months for children who had struggled compared to their peers prior to the pandemic. So we will be using these funds to bridge those gaps. That's just one of the gaps that we're looking at. Schools across the province have long acted as access points to identify support opportunities, assess needs, and connect children and youth to supportive interventions. So again, sometimes the services are out there, but you just don't know how to find them. And when families are going through difficult times, it is oftentimes the education system that is the link to those supports. We also know that that where there are problems within the home, sometimes, situations, and even abusive situations that have occurred, it's often the school that is the point where it is identified. So ensuring that we have good supports in the community that can deal with situations as they arise. So our approach is proactive with a continuum of supports that will address the ongoing and future needs. And I know I can go on and on, but I know you want me to get into some of the other question. In terms of that 13 million top up to the Safe Return to Class Fund, this provides for ventilation improvement projects, proper ventilation that exchanges indoor air for outdoor air. Is an important tool for preventing the spread of COVID. Ventilation projects may include heating, ventilation, and air conditioning and HVAC. This is a top-up from the federal government. On that. But I just want to remind everybody that, in fact, we had guidelines from the Chief Medical Officer of Health and the Health Department that we followed, and all school authorities had to follow to make sure that their heating and ventilation systems were in good functioning order. We provided $250 million in accelerated capital maintenance and renewal funds that school authorities could use to address any issues or any concerns that they had in this area. School authorities, of that $250 million, I believe $44 million were used for ventilation, HVAC, those type of issues. We have in operations and maintenance and infrastructure maintenance and renewal, again, dollars that can be utilized for this very purpose, $667 million.
Thank you so much, Minister. Now we move to 5 minutes of questions from the official opposition, followed by 5 minutes of response from the Minister.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And one of the challenges with this format is that several of the questions haven't been answered, and perhaps it's just because of timing, but it would be great if there was at least a written response to the many questions that were not responded to in the previous rotations, Madam Chair, through you, and for it to be received prior to the expectation that the main estimates be voted on. I'm just going to take a very brief second to embrace a teachable moment. And as somebody with Ukrainian ancestry, my mom, all of her relatives are Ukrainian, and it was her first language, and I'm really proud of my roots and my culture. And I just want to take a second, because I know that people probably don't mean it in a negative way, but it's definitely Ukraine, not the Ukraine. And I know that language change is something that's new. And if I could just explain why, it's because when you talk about a region, you say the in front of it. So the prairies, the Rockies. But when you talk about a nation, it's the name of the nation. And the Ukrainian government, the government of Ukraine, has been very clear about their expectation and the direct name. So I just want to take a moment to acknowledge that in this space, and to say that ensuring that Ukraine historical contributions as well as contemporary contributions to the world and to the place where we live and situate ourselves, I think is fundamental in the curriculum. I know how proud my nieces and nephews are when they have an opportunity to learn about the contributions and about the current context in Ukraine when they're in grade 3. And a very strong plea that if indeed, and I know the minister said in the House that she wants every child to see themselves in this curriculum, that we really, there are so many issues with the social studies curriculum, but that is absolutely one of them, especially in the context of where we're at today in this place and time. So I will leave that plea on the table for the consideration of the minister and the Assembly. I do want to also correct the record. It was, what I stated was that there was an average of 60 new schools or modernizations per year. And the response from the minister was that it was cumulative 60 in the time we were in government. It was 240 cumulatively, so it was an average of about 60 per year. And I know that the government's announced 66 projects that the minister has re-articulated. So again, that's about a quarter of where we were at under the previous government. So it was an average of 60 per year, because it was 240 collectively. And again, thank you to the minister for highlighting the projects that EPSB did have approved during that time. And she listed many schools that opened in the years that the NDP was in government here for Edmonton Public. But there is still a massive gap between where we're at today and where we need to be in terms of having drive times restricted, especially given how underfunded transportation is. And I appreciate that the minister did commission a review, but the actual changes to transportation don't come anywhere close to keeping up with the increased costs for both insurance as well as for fuel costs, as well as for staffing costs and the pressures that we're seeing in an inflationary growth model, inflation that is significant locally as well as not unique to the province of Alberta. But we do have massive inflationary pressures. So having kids spending less time on the bus would be a good goal to have in all parts of the province. So I'm going to go back to Edmonton Public very briefly for this little minute that I have remaining in this exchange to say that the minister's opening comments around reducing underused space, talking about utilization rates, are exactly why the consolidated list included 2 replacement schools to right size the footprint for those schools and to make sure that those kids had a quality learning space to be in. So my question to the minister would be, would the minister be willing to come tour Delton and Spruce Avenue schools and see firsthand the plants that she says are in good operational condition that don't need to be replaced? I'd be happy to go with her. If she'd rather I not be there, that's fine too, but I think it's really important for the minister to know firsthand why these 2 projects were in the capital plan. And again, this is the aggregated list. There are individual lists as well. So if the minister wanted to address the growth pressures in the Southwest or the Northeast, or both, because they're all in year 1, because they're all needed projects, I think that would be important for the minister to consider. Because what she did say in response to the earlier exchange,
Through the chair,
through you,
please.
Madam Chair, is that it's fine for kids to be on the bus upwards of 40 minutes in the city of Edmonton. And I don't think parents in Edmonton would agree with that, Madam Chair. So, yeah.
Thank you, honourable member. Appreciate that. Now, please go ahead, Minister, for your response.
Thank you, and I'll just address the most recent comment first in terms of Edmonton Public School Division. They are in control of their list. Every other school authority, every other metro school authority has created a list where they put their top priorities first. And the top priority for the Edmonton Public School Division was a low utilization school that does not have health and safety issues. So again, they are the ones in control of their list. If they are wanting that a new school in a growth area to be their number 1, then it should rise to the list on their number 1. And I do think we have a very robust Auditor General approved gated process that I'm happy to make everyone aware of. And I'm going to turn it over to my Deputy Minister now to just go through that gated process, because it does have 10 steps. And I am always happy to go and communicate with school authorities. But again, this is Edmonton Public's school list. They're the ones in control of it. And it goes through this process, which I will now turn over to my Deputy Minister.
Thanks, Minister, and hopefully folks can hear me okay. So in 2018, the department established a rigorous process for identifying priority capital projects from an education perspective. And just to remind folks, that's the process that resides within education as it interacts with school authorities. Of course, all approvals for capital spending and capital projects are entertained and approved by Treasury Board. But there is a 10-step process that involves an annual intake of projects from school boards. School boards submit their capital plan to us, and it's in all cases a prioritized list that school boards will provide based on the criteria that they're using within their jurisdiction. And once we receive that that list, we assign a series of evaluation criteria to it. And just to put it in perspective, last year we received 683 project requests from across the system. 15 of those were approved for funding. So just imagine the magnitude of requests that are coming in for a variety of reasons across the system. So the prioritization and the gated process that we use is extremely important because of just the demand that goes well beyond our ability to fund those projects from a budgetary point of view. So once we receive that, we assign a series of criteria to the lists that we get, and then we, in essence, use that scoring system to establish what we request of Treasury Board through the capital planning process. So one of the key criteria that I'll highlight first is health and safety. Really important. Obviously, there's evolving regulatory parameters that different levels of government might be putting in place with regards to public buildings. There may be a deterioration within a school facility that'll necessitate either a significant renovation or a new school entirely. And there may be specific legal requirements that require specific funding for that particular school. So our first criteria is actually health and safety, just to ensure that those schools are suitable for students and teachers. Obviously, the second criteria that we're using when we assess this very large list from school authorities is improved program and delivery of services in those schools. And that can be a number of different components to this criteria list. Probably the most significant one, of course, is utilization and projected enrollment. So once we've identified the safety and personal safety and health issues, we go into whether that school is in a catchment area that has high utilization, whether that school is projecting, or that location is projecting significant future enrollment based on demographics that are produced by that school authority that's submitting the request. And obviously that has a significant kind of weighting within the capital planning process. There's other elements as well that are important. Economic impact, obviously capital spending across multiple sectors does have a material economic impact from a construction perspective, from a workforce mobilization point of view, and so that's also considered.
Thank you so much to the minister's team, and now we'll move over to the independent side. Please proceed, Mr. Barnes.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair, and again, thank you, Minister. Now, keeping with the minister's preference of block questions, would it be all right if I got my 5 questions in say 2 or 3 minutes and give the remaining time to the minister, so you could have 7 or 8 minutes to answer my questions? Is that all right?
Sorry, but the minister is still limited to 5 minutes response.
Is she?
Yes.
Okay.
So the time does not. Is not
So I might as well use it then.
You may as well use it.
Okay. Okay. Thank you very much, Minister. Just 5 things. This is the 3rd time I've asked this morning about the 200.
Would you please direct your comments through the chair?
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. I've asked 3 times. 260 million in premiums, fees, and licenses and other revenue in the 2021 budget. Now it's about $170 million or $270 million. So I'm a believer at this point in time that our Alberta families are paying $270 million in school fees. The craziness of supporting families with tax credits and daycare, and then retaking all the money back from them when their children enter elementary school. So please, I'd like, Minister, a commitment to get something in writing to the legislature or an answer to this question, please. Secondly, reserves. Again, this will be the 3rd time this morning I've asked. $464 million. Minister, I think it's just an empty threat you're making. You admitted that it's up from $363 million a year ago, $464 million today. So, Madam Chair, this continual talking about it is obviously not working. What should it be? And how are we going to get this money returned to the taxpayer or make sure it makes things better for our children? Thirdly, again, I've asked a couple times prior about pensions. 1992, the Alberta taxpayer, the Alberta contributor, has been paying $500 million annually to cover the pre-existing liability for teachers' pensions. How much more do we owe? How much longer does this go? And is that connected to the $95 million you have in savings, it's a credit under the, a reversal under the expense side. The last expense item, pension provisions, you're estimating saving 95 million in pensions. Is that from that pre-1992 existing contribution the taxpayer makes for teachers' pensions, or is that different savings? And if you have time, do you have any thoughts on what the obligation is going to be to taxpayers and contributors going forward for pensions throughout the system? You know, 500 million is one of our bigger expenses, and of course that dates back to 1992. This year, your ministry's estimate of expenses of $8.9 billion, up from 2 years ago of 8.3 billion, up from last year's forecast of 8.8. It is still a 4% annual increase per year. I mean, and again, I would just like to know the matrix and the measurement of where the contributor and the taxpayer is getting value for that money. Lastly, and if you have some thoughts, P3 schools. In infrastructure yesterday, the infrastructure minister talked about how some schools are going to be built under the P3 model. Personally, I believe that when the Alberta taxpayer and the Alberta people will always be in the business of providing quality education, why we would do any schools under P3 instead of using the benefits of local contractors is beyond me, especially when the design is so easily controlled and P3s have potentially hidden costs and potentially unforeseens. But Madam Minister, the question I'd specifically like to ask you, when it comes to whether a school is built by a P3 compared to a more traditional bid and then build system, do you have any extra maintenance and any extra online costs when it's a P3 instead of the conventional way? Is there any extra cost that the contributor of Alberta has to be concerned about? So, Madam Minister, in the last 10 seconds, let me thank you again and your entire team for all the work you do for Alberta children and Alberta families. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Honourable Member. And with that, we will turn it over to the Minister for her response.
Oh, thank you so much. And I'm sorry I couldn't get to your questions earlier. There's just so many questions, so little time. But I will now attempt to answer those. And so let's start with premiums, licenses, and school fees. First of all, these are not for basic school supplies or textbooks. This is in the Education Act. They cannot be used for those items. And in terms of school bus transportation fees, they cannot be allocated elsewhere either. There is actually a regulation that says school boards cannot charge more than the cost of service. They can only charge to recoup their own expenses. So on this particular portion where these premium license and school fees exist are really for extracurricular activities, for hot lunch programs, for things also in terms of rentals. We saw throughout the pandemic that a number of these fees actually went down considerably because, of course, there was online learning at times, there was less extracurricular activities, there were less field trips. And now we are seeing, and I think all of you would agree, it's great to see our kids going back to doing that extracurricular activity, to having field trips and being able to enjoy being kids again. And so while these fees appear to be going up, it's because we're comparing them to last year where they had gone down dramatically before. Again, this is not something that that government controls. These are in fact in the purview of school boards. There are parameters in terms of what they can and can't charge for, and school boards will charge what they need to charge to provide those services to kids that we want to see them have: extracurricular activities, field trips, all of those type of things that need to happen in our schools to make them that much more enjoyable, because we don't want our children to have to continue not having those experiences, which are great experiences for them to have. On the reserves, under the Education Act, the oversight of reserves have been something that the Minister of Education has been overseeing over the last 2 years in terms of reserve spending, because we did feel that reserves were starting to climb higher. There are good accounting practices that would, in fact, determine what a good amount is. We are, because of COVID and the fact that there have been increasing reserves, we are looking at, because my oversight was actually, as minister, was going to come off in September of 2022. And of course, knowing that there could be potential for large numbers of reserves to be spent, which would affect the bottom line, we are looking at how to move forward with school board reserves. But it is top of mind to ensure that there are, in fact, adequate reserves, because reserves are there for a purpose. And we want to make sure that they are utilized properly. But we've always said, particularly in operating reserves, that we want the front lines to have the greatest impact. So we want teachers and educational assistants and supports going to the front lines, because that is where you're going to see the biggest impact. And of course, making sure that while our administration is well looked after, that it isn't that there isn't dollars being diverted in that area. So is there anything on reserves that anyone would like to add?
No, that's good.
Okay, on the teacher pension portion, this is something that has been ongoing for a long time. It is a shared responsibility between the teachers themselves and the ministry. So it's a 50-50 shared responsibility. I'm going to turn it over to Christine to give you more detail in that area and what the expectation is going forward.
Thank you, Minister. Maybe if I could just draw attention to page 76 of the estimates. This outlines the teacher pension plan amounts. So the $385,400,000 that's seen under the statutory operating expense is budgeted for the current service cost of the post-1992 service of the teacher's pension plan for the 22-23 fiscal year. And the current contribution rate of total teachers' salaries is 10.87% as established in September 2020. And the other place that you would be able to see the pension liabilities is on page 208 of the fiscal plan. So budget 2022 reflects that the liability has been fully paid in 2021.
And there was a question, which we'll answer next time.
And your team, we will now move over to the government members. We have approximately just under 4 minutes left, and that will go to Mr. Honourable Member Hunter.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. And I just wanted to maybe give you an opportunity to talk about the good work you've done in red tape reduction. As I said earlier, I think it's absolutely critical to make sure that we're getting our teachers in front of the classroom, making sure administrators are focusing on good teaching outcomes rather than filling out forms. And so if you can maybe talk about the good work you guys have done there, and then also the concept of balanced budget, creating sustainability of our education delivery. I know that you are, you also believe in the importance of making sure we have a sustainable education system and how that balanced budget can help us do that. So I'm going to just I'm going to turn the time back over to you, Minister, for that, and then we can talk about the other questions I have in the future.
We actually are still on the government side, and the Minister does not have an opportunity to speak until this afternoon.
Oh.
So some of the government members, you may speak.
Okay,
or ask questions.
if she can't answer those, that's fine. I'll just maybe ask the questions about, I know that in this budget, it did not have Francophone schools included. And so I'm just wondering how the process works to be able to figure out the capital projects. If you can help us understand that. I know that also there were some questions by the opposition about the education or capital projects in Edmonton. So if you could provide us with a little bit of an outline about how that process works to be able to figure out who gets those capital projects, that would be very helpful. Also on page, and that is on page 154. of the fiscal plan that talks about the capital spending projects in 2022 and 23. There's also, on page 1 of the capital plan, it shows that $117.6 million is being allocated over a 3-year period for the modular classroom program. And so I'd like, if the minister could please explain what this program is and how it will benefit students. I know that some of the schools that I've chatted with, they're very grateful for that modular program, as it is a very quick turnaround to be able to fix their needs. If they've got a surge, if a bunch of people decide that they're going to have their kids come back into school because they don't feel like COVID is as much of a concern anymore, then we might see a surge in certain areas that we haven't seen in the past. And so that modular program would be absolutely critical, I think, to be able to address that need. And so if the minister could answer those questions, that would be very helpful. And that's all I have, Madam Chair.
Pardon me?
That's all I have.
All right, well, thank you so much, Honourable Member. So I must advise the committee that the first portion of the time allotted for consideration of ministry's estimates has concluded. And I would like to remind committee members that we're scheduled to meet again this afternoon at 3:30 p.m. to continue our consideration of estimates of the Ministry of Education. Thank you, everyone. I appreciate your time today and wish you all an enjoyable lunch.